The town of Red Hollow sat like a scar on the Wyoming frontier, all wooden bones and bitter pride. It wasn't the kind of place that welcomed dreamers or forgave difference. It was a town that measured worth in conformity, where every Sunday dress had to match, every man had to drink at Murphy's saloon, and every woman had to know her place in the carefully constructed hierarchy of respectability. Clara Hayes had never fit into any of it. At 26, she'd learned to make herself small, to move through the streets with her eyes down, her voice quiet, her hopes tucked away where no one could mock them. She'd learned that being overlooked was safer than being seen, that silence was armor against a town that had decided, long ago, that she would never be enough. The bakery was all she had left of her father, a tiny storefront wedged between the general store and the boarding house on Main Street. Every morning before dawn, Clara lit the ovens and transformed flour, butter, and hope into something beautiful. Cinnamon rolls that spiraled like prayers, sourdough loaves with crusts that sang when you tapped them, apple tarts that made hardened miners close their eyes and remember mothers they'd left behind in distant cities. She poured everything she couldn't say into her baking, all the tenderness that had nowhere else to go, all the worth she couldn't prove any other way. The people of Red Hollow ate her bread and dismissed her in the same breath. Poor Clara, they'd say, their voices dripping with pity that felt more like poison. Still alone, still plain, still hoping someone might want her. Her mother, Catherine, tried to shield her from the worst of it, tried to pretend the whispers didn't hurt, that the intentional snubs at church socials didn't matter, that being invisible was somehow a blessing. But Clara knew better. She knew what it meant when the eligible young men looked right through her at gatherings, their eyes sliding past as if she were furniture. She knew what it meant when the town's matrons organized quilting circles and charity events and somehow always forgot to invite her. She knew what it meant when even the rough-edged ranch hands, men who would court anyone with a pulse, never once tipped their hats in her direction. Red Hollow had decided she was forgettable. And in a town this small, the collective verdict was law. The only time they noticed her was when they needed something. When harvest festivals required pies by the dozen, when weddings demanded elaborate cakes, when church socials needed refreshments. Then, suddenly, Clara became visible. Useful. A convenience to be exploited and discarded once the last crumb was consumed. She told herself it was enough. Told herself that being needed, even if she wasn't wanted, was a kind of purpose. Told herself that dignity could be found in the work itself, in the alchemy of creating beauty from simple ingredients, in the quiet satisfaction of feeding people who would never feed her soul in return. But late at night, alone in the small apartment above the bakery, Clara sometimes let herself imagine a different life. One where someone looked at her and saw worth. Where someone chose her not because they needed something, but because they wanted her. Messy heart, quiet dreams, and all. It was a dangerous kind of hoping, the kind that could break you if you let it. Chapter 2. The Storm. The dust storm came without warning on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. Clara had just finished loading the last of the wedding cakes into the delivery wagon, 3 tiers of vanilla sponge with buttercream roses for the mayor's daughter, who hadn't spoken a word to her during any of the planning meetings, communicating instead through her mother with barely concealed disdain. The sky had been clear that morning, a sharp blue that promised fair weather. But the frontier was treacherous that way, beautiful one moment and deadly the next. By noon, the western horizon had darkened to a bruised purple-black, and the wind began to howl through Red Hollow's single street like a living thing with teeth. "Clara, get inside!" old Mrs. Chen called from the boarding house porch, her voice nearly lost in the rising wind. "Storm's coming fast!" But Clara was already in the street, trying desperately to secure the wagon as the first gusts hit. The horses screamed and reared, their eyes rolling white with terror. The carefully stacked cakes tilted dangerously. "No, no, no!" Clara grabbed for the top tier as it began to slide, but the wind caught it, tearing it from her hands and smashing it against the wagon wheel. Buttercream and cake shrapnel exploded across the dirt street. Then the real storm hit. It came like a wall, a solid mass of wind and dust that turned day into choking darkness. The world disappeared into a brown howl of chaos. Claire couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but feel the remaining cakes being ripped from the wagon, her livelihood dissolving into the maelstrom. She tried to hold on, tried to save something, anything, but the wind knocked her sideways. She hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Dust filled her mouth, her nose, her eyes. The world became nothing but noise and pain, and the terrible understanding that she was losing everything. The wagon overturned with a splintering crash. The horses broke free and bolted. And Clara, choking and blind and broken, simply curled into herself in the middle of Main Street and waited for it to end. That's when the hand found her. Strong, steady, unyielding against the chaos. It closed around her arm and hauled her upward with irresistible force. Clara found herself pulled against something solid, a chest, a body, a presence that didn't yield to the storm. An arm locked around her waist, and she was lifted bodily off the ground and carried through the screaming wind. She couldn't see her rescuer's face, could barely register anything beyond the unexpected safety of being held, of being protected, of mattering enough to someone that they'd walk into hell to pull her out. 30 seconds later, they crashed through a door. The wind's roar became muffled. Clara found herself set down on rough wooden planks, her rescuer's hand steadying her until her legs stopped shaking enough to support her weight. She blinked, trying to clear the dust from her eyes, trying to make sense of where she was. The feed store. They were in the feed store, the heavy door barred against the storm outside, and standing in front of her, silent and watchful, was Rowan Vance. Chapter 3. The Mountain Man. Everyone in Red Hollow knew of Rowan Vance, but almost no one knew him. He lived alone in a cabin somewhere up in the mountains. No one was quite sure where. He came into town maybe once a month to trade furs and buy supplies, conducting his business in near total silence before disappearing back into the wilderness. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair worn too long and a beard that obscured half his face. His eyes were the color of winter storms, gray and unreadable. The town had invented stories about him, as towns always do about men who choose solitude. Some said he was running from the law. Others claimed he'd gone mad after losing his family to Indians or disease or some other frontier tragedy. The kinder rumors suggested he was simply strange, damaged in some fundamental way that made civilization unbearable. What everyone agreed on was that Rowan Vance was someone to avoid. Dangerous, probably. Unpredictable, certainly. The kind of man you didn't make eye contact with, didn't engage in conversation, didn't trust. Clara had seen him before, of course. Hard not to notice a man like that, even in a town that pretended he didn't exist. But she'd never been this close to him, never had those strange gray eyes focused entirely on her. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, low and careful, like he was translating his thoughts into words through some rusty mechanism. Clara looked down. Her palms were scraped raw, embedded with dirt and small stones. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. She could feel wetness on her forehead that was probably blood. "The cakes," she heard herself say, her voice breaking. "The wedding cakes. They're ruined, all of them. I don't have time to. The wedding's on Saturday and I promised." The words dissolved into something between a laugh and a sob. 3 weeks of work, gone. The mayor would demand his deposit back, would spread the word that she was unreliable, would ensure that no one in Red Hollow ever trusted her with important orders again. "Sit," Rowan said, gesturing to a wooden crate. "Storm's not done yet." He was right. Outside, the wind continued its assault on the town, rattling the feed store's walls and forcing dust through every crack in the boards. Inside, the dimness and the smell of grain and leather created a strange pocket of calm. Clara sat because her legs gave her no choice. Rowan disappeared into the back of the store and returned with a canteen and a surprisingly clean cloth. "Give me your hands," he said. Clara hesitated, then extended her scraped palms. Rowan knelt in front of her, actually knelt, this feared mountain man, lowering himself to tend to her injuries with a gentleness that made her throat tight. He poured water over her hands, washing away the dirt and blood with careful precision. The cloth followed, dabbing at the deeper scrapes with a touch so light she barely felt it. "Why did you come out there?" Clara asked quietly. "Into the storm. You could have been killed." Rowan didn't look up from his work. "Saw you fall. Couldn't leave you." Everyone else did. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. But it was true. She'd seen faces in windows as the storm hit, people watching from safety. None of them had opened their doors. Rowan's hand stilled for just a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something that might have been understanding. People mostly look after themselves, can't be surprised by it. Does that make it acceptable? No. He moved to her forehead, carefully cleaning the cut there with the same meticulous attention. Just makes it true. They sat in silence while the storm raged outside. Clara studied the man in front of her, really looked at him for the first time. He moved with the economy of someone who'd spent years alone, who'd learned to be precise because there was no one to catch his mistakes. His hands were scarred and calloused, but steady. His face, what she could see of it behind the beard, held a weathered quality, like stone shaped by wind and time. "I've seen you before," Rowan said suddenly, "at the bakery. Watched you through the window sometimes when I'm in town." Clara's breath caught. "You have? You make the place look—" He searched for the word, "like it matters, like there's care in it. Not many things in this town feel cared for." It was possibly the longest speech she'd ever heard him make, and the words landed in her chest like hot coals, warming something she'd thought frozen beyond recovery. "Thank you," she whispered, "for coming out there. For this." Rowan stood, putting careful distance between them again. "Storm should pass soon. I'll walk you home." "You don't have to." "I know." But when the wind finally died and they stepped back out into Main Street, Rowan stayed beside her. The town was chaos. Overturned wagons, scattered goods, broken windows, and everywhere the gritty residue of the dust storm coating every surface. And in the middle of it all, the remains of Clara's cakes, trampled and destroyed beyond recognition. A small crowd had gathered, surveying the damage to the town. Their eyes found Clara and her companion, and the whispers started immediately. "With Rowan Vance. Completely inappropriate. What will people think?" Clara felt Rowan stiffen beside her, felt him preparing to retreat, to disappear back into the mountains and leave her to face the judgment alone. Without thinking, she reached out and caught his hand. His eyes snapped to hers, surprised and wary. "Thank you," she said again, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "You saved my life." For a long moment, Rowan just stared at her. Then slowly, his raw fingers curled around hers and squeezed once before letting go. "Get home safe, Clara Hayes," he said quietly, and walked away into the settling dust. Clara turned to face the town and lifted her chin. Let them whisper. Let them judge. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen to see her when it cost them something to do it. That had to count for something. Chapter 4. Aftermath. The next 3 days were brutal. The mayor's wife appeared at the bakery before Clara had even finished cleaning up the storm damage, her face pinched with righteous indignation. "Naturally, we'll be expecting a full refund of our deposit," Mrs. Ashford announced, not even pretending sympathy. "And we've arranged with the hotel in Cheyenne to provide the wedding cake instead. They, at least, can be relied upon." Clara's mother tried to intercede. "The storm destroyed half the town, Margaret. Surely you can't hold Clara responsible for an act of nature. I hold her responsible for being careless enough to have the cakes loaded during threatening weather," Mrs. Ashford snapped. A more professional establishment would have exercised better judgment. The words were designed to wound, and they found their mark. Clara handed over the refund money she couldn't afford to lose, and said nothing as Mrs. Ashford swept out with her victory. But that was only the beginning. By Wednesday, the entire town knew that Clara had been rescued by Rowan Vance. By Thursday, the story had evolved into something far more scandalous. She'd been seen holding his hand, after all, in public. And everyone knew what kind of man Rowan Vance was. Violent, probably, certainly unstable. What kind of woman would associate with someone like that? The customers who'd previously tolerated her became scarce. Orders were quietly canceled. When Clara appeared at church on Sunday, the pews around her family remained conspicuously empty. "They're children," her mother said fiercely, walking home with her spine straight despite the humiliation. "Small-minded, cruel children. You did nothing wrong." But Clara could see the strain in her mother's face, the way Catherine's hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. This was the cost of being seen with the wrong person in a town like Red Hollow. Not just your own isolation, but your family's too. "Maybe I should apologize," Clara said quietly that night. "Tell them it was just That he was only helping, nothing more. That we're not. Don't you dare! Her mother's voice was sharp. Don't you dare diminish yourself for people who've never valued you anyway. That man showed you more kindness in 5 minutes than this entire town has shown in 5 years. But what if the bakery fails? What if we can't? Then we'll figure it out. But we won't do it by apologizing for being treated like human beings. Clara wanted to believe her, wanted to think that dignity could sustain them when paying customers couldn't. But the ledger books told a different story. 3 canceled orders this week, 5 the week before. The rent was due in 2 weeks and she was $30 short. On Monday morning, she found the first gift, a bundle of wildflowers, mountain asters and Indian paintbrush, tied with a strip of leather and left on the bakery's doorstep. No note, no explanation, just beauty offered without expectation of return. Clara knew who'd left them. The same way she knew who'd left the cord of neatly stacked firewood beside the back door on Tuesday. The same way she knew who'd repaired the broken shutter on her window Wednesday night, working so quietly she hadn't heard a sound. Rowan Vance was courting her in the language of a man who'd forgotten how to use words for anything but necessity. It was the most tender thing anyone had ever done for her. On Thursday evening, she waited by the back door until she heard the soft footsteps in the alley. When she opened it, Rowan froze like a wild thing caught in lamplight, a bag of oats for her mother's chickens in his hands. "You keep doing this," Clara said softly. "The feed store had extra." His eyes wouldn't meet hers. Seemed wasteful to let it sit. "Rowan." He finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his face nearly undid her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You barely know me." "Know enough." He set the oats down carefully. "Know you make beautiful things. Know this town treats you like you're nothing. Know you're not. They're saying terrible things about you because of me. Let them. It doesn't bother you?" Rowan's mouth tightened. "Been saying terrible things about me for years. Can't hurt me more than I already—" He stopped, jaw working like he was physically restraining words from escaping. Clara stepped closer, close enough to see the scars that disappeared under his collar, close enough to notice the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "Then you already what?" "Nothing. Doesn't matter." He stepped back, rebuilding the distance between them. "You should go inside, getting cold." "Wait!" Claire's hand shot out, catching his sleeve. "I want to ask you something." Rowan went very still. Clara could feel the tension in him, could sense how close he was to bolting. She made her voice as gentle as she knew how. "Would you like to come to dinner tomorrow? Just a meal. To say thank you properly." For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he did, his voice was barely audible. "People see me come in, it'll make things worse for you." "Things are already worse, and I'm tired of making decisions based on what terrible people might think." Something flickered in Rowan's eyes. Hope, maybe, or the memory of it. "You sure?" "I'm sure." "Then, yes, I'd like that." He left quickly after that, disappearing into the darkness before Clara could say anything more, but she stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the space where he'd been and feeling something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. The kind that could destroy you, or save you. Chapter 5. The Dinner. Clara spent all of Friday preparing for dinner with the kind of nervous energy she usually reserved for major catering events. She roasted a chicken with herbs, made fresh biscuits, prepared her mother's recipe for green beans with bacon. She set the table with their good plates, not fancy but clean and carefully arranged. Her mother watched all of this with knowing eyes. "You like him," Catherine said. It wasn't a question. Clara's hand stilled on the tablecloth she was smoothing. "I barely know him." "That's not what I asked." "Mama." "It's all right, sweetheart." Her mother's hand covered hers, warm and solid. "It's all right to want something for yourself, even if it scares you. What if he doesn't come? What if he changed his mind? Then we'll eat a lovely dinner and save the leftovers. But I don't think he'll disappoint you." Catherine was right. At exactly 6 o'clock, there was a soft knock at the back door. When Clara opened it, Rowan stood there looking profoundly uncomfortable in clean clothes, his hair still damp like he'd dunked his whole head in the river. He held a package wrapped in butcher paper. Brought venison, he said, thrusting it toward her. Fresh from yesterday. Thought you might, if you want. Thank you. Clara accepted the package, her fingers brushing his. Come in, please. Rowan entered like a man walking into a church he wasn't sure would have him, careful, reverent, ready to leave at the first sign he didn't belong. His eyes swept the small apartment above the bakery, taking in the modest furnishings, the books on the shelf, the dried flowers hanging from the rafters. It's not much, Clara said, suddenly self-conscious. It's good, Rowan replied. Feels lived in. Feels like... Like what? Like a home. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning Clara wasn't sure how to parse. Her mother chose that moment to emerge from the kitchen, saving them both from the intensity of the moment. Mr. Vance, how good of you to join us. I'm Catherine Hayes, Clara's mother. She extended her hand with genuine warmth, and after a moment's hesitation, Rowan shook it. Ma'am, thank you for having me. Thank you for keeping my daughter from being blown to Kansas last week. Please sit. Claire's been cooking since dawn. The dinner started awkwardly. Rowan clearly wasn't accustomed to conversation, and Clara kept second-guessing everything that came out of her mouth. But Catherine had a gift for drawing people out, and slowly, carefully, she began to coax words from their silent guest. Where did he live? Up in the high country, about 2 hours north, in the cabin his father had built before the war. How did he manage alone? It was easier than people thought, if you knew the land. The mountains provided if you respected them. Did he ever get lonely? A pause before that answer, long enough that Clara thought he might not respond. Then, quietly, sometimes. Yes. Why do you stay away? Clara asked, emboldened by the softening in his demeanor. From town, I mean. You could live closer, make things easier on yourself. Rowan's fork stilled on his plate. Easier for who? For you. Town doesn't want me closer. Better for everyone if I keep my distance. What if some people want you closer? The words escaped before Clara could stop them, bold and revealing and impossible to take back. Rowan's eyes locked on hers, and the air between them charged with something electric. Clara, her mother said gently, why don't you show Mr. Vance your father's workshop? I'm sure he'd appreciate seeing the oven set up. It was a transparent excuse to give them privacy, but Clara seized it gratefully. Would you like to see the bakery? Rowan nodded, and they escaped downstairs to the quiet sanctuary of Clara's workspace. She lit the lamps, bringing the room to life. The oven stood cold and dark now, but the space still smelled of flour and cinnamon and yeast. Her tools hung on the walls in careful organization. Half-finished orders waited under cloth covers for morning. This is where the magic happens, she said, trying for lightness. Rowan moved through the space slowly, taking it in with that careful attention she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. He paused at her father's old workbench, running his hand over the scarred wood. Built this himself, Clara said softly. Every inch of it. He said a bakery was more than a business. It was a promise to feed people, body and soul, that it was sacred work. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. He died when I was 17, pneumonia. After that, it was just Mama and me trying to keep his dream alive. She laughed, but it came out bitter. Some days I wonder if we're succeeding or just delaying the inevitable. Rowan turned to face her fully. You're succeeding. Anyone with eyes can see that. The town doesn't seem to think so. The town's a fool. The simple conviction in his voice made Clara's chest tight. You don't know me well enough to say that. Know enough. He took a step closer, and Clara's breath caught. Know you care about your work. Know you're kind to your mother. Know you kept going when most people would have quit. Know you're brave enough to invite a man like me to dinner, even though it'll cost you. What kind of man are you, Rowan? The question hung between them. Rowan's face shuddered, some old pain rising to the surface before he could contain it. The kind you shouldn't trust, he said roughly. The kind who breaks things. The kind who... Saved my life? That's different. How? Because... He stopped, struggling. Because you don't know what I am, what I've done, what I'm... The words choked off. He turned away sharply, shoulders rigid. I should go. This was a mistake. Clara moved before thinking, putting herself between Rowan and the door. Don't. Clara, don't run. Please, I'm tired of everyone running from me or making me feel like I'm not worth staying for. Just don't. Rowan stood frozen, trapped between her plea and his own demons. When he spoke, his voice was raw. You don't understand. I'm not good at this. At people. At being around. I haven't had dinner with anyone in 5 years. Haven't had a real conversation in longer. I don't know how to do this without ruining it. Then we'll ruin it together, Clara said softly. I'm not exactly practiced at this either, but I'd like to try. If you would. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, Rowan's shoulders lowered. He didn't smile. Clara wasn't sure he remembered how, but something in his face gentled. All right, he whispered. All right. They stood there in the dim bakery, two broken people trying to figure out if they could make something whole together. Neither of them knew the answer yet, but for the first time in a long time, both of them wanted to find out. Chapter 6. The Shift. After that night, something shifted in Red Hollow's delicate ecosystem of judgment and propriety. The town noticed that Rowan Vance had been seen entering Clara Hayes' bakery after dark. They noticed he'd stayed for hours. They noticed, and they drew their inevitable, scandalous conclusions. By Sunday, the whispers had crystallized into open hostility. Clara arrived at church to find Mrs. Pemberton physically blocking her usual pew. I'm sorry, dear, but this section is reserved for respectable families, the woman said, loud enough for half the congregation to hear. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the back. Clara felt her mother stiffen beside her, preparing to fight. But Clara put a gentle hand on Catherine's arm and turned to face Mrs. Pemberton with perfect calm. Of course, she said clearly, wouldn't want to contaminate respectability with basic human kindness. That might be contagious. She walked to the back pew with her head high, feeling the eyes on her like knives. Her mother followed, radiating fury, and they sat in their exile while the pastor droned about Christian charity to a congregation that wouldn't recognize it if it hit them in the face. The consequences came swiftly. By Monday afternoon, Clara had lost 3 more standing orders. The general store informed her they'd be reconsidering their partnership regarding her supplying their bakery goods. Even the boarding house, her most reliable customer, sent a polite note terminating their contract. That evening, Clara sat at her father's desk and did the math. With her current rate of cancellations, she had maybe 6 weeks before she couldn't make rent. 8 if they stopped eating anything but bread and potatoes. 10 if they sold her mother's wedding ring. She was staring at these numbers when Rowan appeared at the back door, emerging from the darkness like a conjured thought. Heard what happened at church, he said without preamble. News travels fast. Always does in small towns, especially when they think they've got something to judge. He stepped inside and Clara noticed he carried a worn satchel. Got something to show you. Rowan, if this is about, it's about business, real business, the kind that doesn't care what the church ladies think. Despite herself, Clara was intrigued. I'm listening. Rowan spread a hand-drawn map on her work table, weighted down at the corners with flour sacks. Clara leaned in, studying what looked like a route marked through the mountains north of Red Hollow. There's mining camps up here, Rowan said, pointing to several marked locations. Silver Strikes mostly. 3 camps, maybe 200 men between them. They're working 12-hour shifts in the dark, eating nothing but salt pork and hardtack because there's no infrastructure yet. No supply chains worth mentioning. And they're desperate for anything that reminds them they're human. Real food, bread that isn't moldy, something that tastes like civilization. He looked up at her, and Clara saw the careful hope in his eyes. They'd pay premium prices for what you make. 3 times what you charge here, maybe more. Clara's mind started racing. But how would I get the goods there? Those camps are days away, and the roads. I'd take them. Know every trail in those mountains. Could make the run twice a week. Keep your product fresh. Bring back payment. He paused. Wouldn't even have to put your name on it if you didn't want. Could just be anonymous goods from Cheyenne or somewhere. Keep you safe from more talk. No. The word came out sharp. No. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it as myself. Let them know exactly who's feeding them. A smile ghosted across Rowan's face, the first real one she'd ever seen from him. It transformed him. cracked through the hard exterior to reveal something warm underneath. Thought you might say that. This would be a real partnership, Clara said carefully. You're talking about serious risk, serious time investment. I couldn't pay you properly for months, not until we built up the operation. Don't need paying. Need something to do besides sit in that cabin and think too much. Everyone needs pain, Rowan. He was quiet for a moment, his finger tracing one of the trail lines on his map. When he spoke, his voice was low. Maybe we figure out a split. 60-40 in your favor till you're stable, then 50-50 after. That's not fair to you. Clara. He looked at her directly. I'm offering because I want to, because watching you get crushed by this town makes me angry in ways I can't fix what they're doing to you, but I can give you a way around it. Let me. The vulnerability in his words stole Clara's breath. This man, this strange, damaged, careful man, was offering her not just a business solution, but an act of defiance, a way to survive without bending. Okay, she whispered. Okay, let's do it. They spent the next 3 hours planning. Rowan knew the camp's payroll schedules, their shift patterns, their desperate needs. Clara calculated production capacity, supply costs, pricing structures. They argued about logistics and compromised on transport methods, and slowly built something that looked almost possible. By midnight, they had a plan. By 1 a.m., they'd shaken on it, and by the time Rowan slipped back into the darkness, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose, direction, partnership, hope. Chapter 7. Building. The next month was the hardest Clara had ever worked. She woke at 3 a.m. to start baking, producing twice her normal volume. Sourdough loaves by the dozen, cornbread by the pan, cinnamon rolls that Rowan swore made the miners weep. She worked until her hands cramped and her back screamed, until flour dust coated every surface and the smell of yeast permeated her dreams. Rowan made his first run to the camps on a Thursday, loading his horse and 2 pack mules with carefully wrapped goods. Clara stood in the pre-dawn darkness, watching him secure the last bundle, suddenly terrified that he wouldn't come back. Be safe, she said, hating how small her voice sounded. Rowan paused, then stepped close enough that she could see the details of his face in the lamplight. I'll be back Sunday night. Promise. You don't have to promise. Yeah, I do. His hand came up, hovering near her cheek for a moment before falling away. For the first time in 5 years, I've got a reason to come back. Not wasting that. He left before she could respond, disappearing into the mountains with her livelihood strapped to his pack animals. For 3 days, Clara existed in a state of suspended anxiety. What if the camps rejected her goods? What if Rowan got hurt in the mountains? What if this whole thing was just another way for her to fail, harder and more publicly than before? But Sunday night, Rowan returned. He came through her back door looking exhausted but triumphant, and when he upended his satchel on her work table, coins spilled out in a golden cascade. Sold everything, he said, a rare grin splitting his face. Had a bidding war over the last loaf of sourdough. Camp foreman wants to place a standing order for 50 loaves a week. And he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Got a letter from the owner of the Silver Peak mine. Wants to discuss catering his daughter's wedding. 300 guests. Clara stared at the money, at the letter, at Rowan's delighted face. Then she started laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from relief and disbelief and pure, uncomplicated joy. We did it, she breathed. We actually did it. You did it. I just walked it up a mountain. No? Clara moved around the table, standing close enough to see the pride in his eyes. We did it. Together. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, maybe, of what they were building beyond just a business. Something fragile and dangerous and worth protecting. Rowan left soon after, but Clara stayed up late counting coins and planning production and feeling, for the first time since her father died, like maybe the bakery would survive after all. The town noticed, of course. Noticed that Clara seemed less desperate. Noticed that Rowan Vance was making regular trips to her bakery. Noticed that she'd stopped caring about their approval. The whispers intensified. The isolation deepened. But Clara had money in her pocket and orders to fill, and a partner who showed up when he said he would. The town's judgment started to matter less and less, Until the night they decided judgment wasn't enough. Until the night they chose violence. Until the night everything burned. Clara Hayes stood in the ashes of her bakery, her hands blistered and her heart broken, and made a choice that would change everything. But that moment, the fire, the revelation, the impossible question, was still 3 weeks away. For now, in the aftermath of that first successful run, she allowed herself to believe that hard work and partnership might be enough to overcome a town's cruelty. She didn't know yet how wrong she was. Didn't know that Red Hollow's hatred ran deeper than economics or gossip. Didn't know that some people would rather destroy what they couldn't control than let it exist beyond their reach. But she would learn. And when she did, she would have to decide who she really was. The quiet girl who made herself small to survive, or the woman who would risk everything to claim the life she deserved. The fire was coming, and with it, the truth that would set them both free, or consume them completely. The success came faster than either of them expected, and with it, complications neither had anticipated. By the end of the second week, Clara was running 3 ovens simultaneously and sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. Her mother had taken over all the front-of-house operations for their dwindling local business, while Clara focused entirely on the mining camp orders. The kitchen had become a factory of flour and fire. Production lines of cooling racks stretched across every available surface. Rowan arrived every Sunday and Wednesday like clockwork, his presence as reliable as sunrise. He'd expanded his operation too, built special insulated packs to keep the bread fresh longer, mapped faster routes through the mountain passes, even negotiated storage arrangements at the camps, so Clara's goods could be distributed throughout the week instead of consumed immediately. They worked well together, Clara realized. Their communication had evolved into something almost telepathic. A glance, a nod, entire conversations conducted in the spaces between words. When Rowan suggested modifications to her packaging, she listened. When Clara needed different delivery schedules, he adapted. They moved around each other in the cramped bakery like dancers who'd rehearsed the steps 1,000 times. The town watched this partnership with growing resentment. "It's unnatural," Mrs. Ashford proclaimed loudly at the general store, ensuring her voice carried to where Clara was purchasing supplies. "A decent woman doesn't conduct business alone with a man like that. Everyone knows what's really happening up in those mountains." Clara kept her eyes on the merchant weighing her flour order, her jaw tight. Her mother, less inclined toward restraint, turned to face the mayor's wife directly. "What exactly are you implying, Margaret?" Catherine's voice could have cut glass. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Your daughter has abandoned all propriety, and now she's running a successful business," Catherine interrupted. "Something that apparently offends you more than actual Christian charity ever motivated you. How peculiar." Mrs. Ashford's face flushed crimson. "How dare you?" "How dare I what? Point out hypocrisy? Notice that you're more concerned with invented scandal than with the fact that Clara is feeding 200 men who'd otherwise go hungry? Interesting priorities for someone who claims moral superiority." The confrontation might have escalated further, but the merchant, old Mr. Chen, who'd always been quietly kind, cleared his throat loudly. "Mrs. Hayes, your order comes to $8.30, and Mrs. Ashford, I believe your husband was looking for you at the courthouse." It was a diplomatic fiction, but Mrs. Ashford seized the exit. She swept from the store with her nose in the air, leaving a wake of displaced righteousness behind her. Mr. Chen waited until she was gone before speaking quietly. "Don't let them grind you down, Miss Clara. What you're doing, it's good work, honest work. Some folks can't stand to see others succeed outside their control." "Thank you, Mr. Chen. Although," he added, even quieter, "you should be careful. The mayor's been talking to Sheriff Porter, nothing official yet, but there's rumbling about investigating irregularities in your business practices." Clara's stomach dropped. "What kind of irregularities?" "The invented kind. They're looking for excuses, is what I'm saying. Just watch yourself." The warning sat heavy in Clara's chest as she and her mother carried their supplies back to the bakery. That evening, when Rowan arrived to discuss the week's orders, she told him about the conversation. His reaction was immediate and dark. "They're going to try to shut you down." "They can't. I'm not doing anything illegal." "Doesn't matter. Small-town sheriffs do what the mayor tells them, and the mayor does what his wife tells him. If Mrs. Ashford wants you gone, they'll find a reason." Clara sank onto her work stool, suddenly exhausted. So what do I do? Just wait for them to manufacture charges? Hope they lose interest? No, Rowan's voice was firm. You make yourself too valuable to destroy. Get more customers, more contracts, more people depending on your success. Make it so shutting you down hurts them more than it helps. That could take months. Then we work faster. He pulled out his map again, but this time he'd added new markings. There's a railroad construction camp starting up about 40 miles west. 500 workers. And I heard rumors of a new lumber operation north of the Silver Peak mine. Both of them need suppliers. Clara studied the map, her mind already calculating production requirements, cost structures, logistics. It was overwhelming. It was also their only option. I'd need to hire help, she said slowly. I can't produce enough alone to supply operations that size. So hire help. Who in this town would work for me? Everyone thinks I'm... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Rowan's hand covered hers on the table, warm and solid and grounding. Then we find people from outside town. There's families homesteading out past Miller's Creek, decent folks trying to make a living. Some of them have daughters who'd probably appreciate paid work. And the boarding house down in Bridger's Crossing is always full of people looking for employment. That's a day's ride from here. I'll go. Put out word you're hiring. See who's interested. He squeezed her hand once before releasing it. You're not alone in this, Clara. Stop acting like you are. The simple statement made her throat tight. She'd been alone for so long that partnership still felt foreign, something that might evaporate if she relied on it too much. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Really? You could have a peaceful life up in your cabin. No complications, no town drama. Instead, you're running supplies to mining camps and arguing with you about expansion plans. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Maybe I got tired of peace. Maybe I realized being alone and being safe aren't the same thing as being alive. And this makes you feel alive? You make me feel alive. The words were raw, unguarded. Rowan looked almost surprised he'd said them out loud. First time in 5 years I've woken up wanting something more than just getting through another day. That's worth fighting for. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. They were alone in the bakery, the evening light slanting through the windows in golden bars, the air still warm from the day's baking. Rowan stood close enough that she could see the variations of gray in his eyes, could count the small scars on his hands, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Rowan, she whispered, not sure what she was asking for. He understood anyway. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so physically imposing. His thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch reverent and careful, like she was something precious that might break. I'm not good at this, he said quietly, at saying what I mean, at being what someone needs. I'm damaged, Clara, got pieces missing that probably aren't coming back, but when I'm with you, I feel like maybe that's okay. Like maybe I don't have to be whole to be enough. You are enough, Clara said fiercely. You're more than... The back door crashed open with enough force to rattle the windows. Both of them jumped apart as Catherine rushed in, her face pale with panic. Clara, you need to come upstairs. Now. There's... She stopped, taking in the scene, the obvious intimacy they'd been interrupted from. Later. Explanations later. Right now there's a mob forming outside the church and someone just threw a rock through our front window. The fear in her mother's voice snapped Clara into motion. She grabbed her shawl and followed Catherine up the stairs, Rowan close behind. From the apartment window they could see the crowd, maybe 30 people gathered in the street below, their faces twisted with righteous anger in the torchlight. Sheriff Porter stood at the front, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Behind him, Mayor Ashford held some kind of official-looking document. Clara Hayes, the mayor shouted, come out here. We need to discuss your business operations. Don't go down there, Rowan said immediately. That's not a discussion, that's a lynching. But Clara was already moving toward the door. Her mother caught her arm. Sweetheart, he's right. That crowd, they're dangerous. If I don't face them, they'll just break down the door. At least this way I control the terms. Clara pulled free gently but firmly. Stay here, both of you. Please. She descended the stairs and stepped out onto the bakery's front porch before her courage could fail. The crowd's noise rose when they saw her, a mixture of jeers and accusations that blurred into an incomprehensible wall of sound. "Quiet!" Sheriff Porter's voice cut through the chaos. "Let the mayor speak." Ashford stepped forward, his expression a masterpiece of false sympathy. "Miss Hayes, I'm afraid we've received multiple complaints about your business practices. Specifically, there are concerns about health code violations, unlicensed commercial activities, and," he glanced at the paper in his hands, "inappropriate moral conduct that reflects poorly on Red Hollow's reputation." Clara's fingernails bit into her palms. "Those are serious accusations, Mayor. I assume you have evidence?" "We have testimony from concerned citizens that you've been conducting business at all hours with an unmarried man of questionable character, that you've been producing food in conditions that may not meet safety standards, that you've been engaging in commercial activities without proper municipal licensing." "I have the same licensing my father had when he ran this bakery, the same licensing every business on Main Street operates under. As for my business hours, I work when the work demands it. And as for my associates," she let her voice rise, addressing the crowd directly, "I choose my partners based on their reliability and character, not on this town's prejudices." "So you admit to an inappropriate relationship with Rowan Vance?" Mrs. Pemberton called from the crowd. "I admit to having a business partnership with a man who's shown me more respect and support than this entire town combined." The crowd erupted. Someone threw another rock that shattered against the bakery wall inches from Clara's head. She flinched but held her ground. "Enough!" Sheriff Porter stepped between Clara and the mob. "This isn't how we do things. If there are legitimate complaints, we file them properly and investigate. We don't throw rocks like children." "Then investigate," someone shouted. "Shut her down until you can verify she's not running some kind of brothel operation disguised as a bakery." Clara's vision went red at the edges. She started to step forward, to unleash years of suppressed fury on these people who'd made her life miserable, but a hand on her shoulder stopped her. Rowan had come down despite her instructions. He stood beside her on the porch, and his presence seemed to physically push the crowd back a step. "Anyone who believes Clara Hayes is anything less than completely honorable is a liar," he said, his voice carrying that quality of barely restrained violence that made people nervous. "She's worked harder than any three of you combined. She's built something from nothing while you all sat around inventing reasons to tear her down. So here's what's going to happen. The sheriff is going to conduct whatever investigation satisfies the law. You're all going to go home and stop acting like a mob. And Clara is going to continue running her business because she's done nothing wrong except make you feel small by comparison." "Who the hell do you think you are?" someone yelled. "You don't even live here." "I'm someone who recognizes quality when I see it, which is apparently more than this town can manage." Mayor Ashford stepped forward, his face flushed. "Mr. Vance, your defense of Miss Hayes only reinforces the concerns about impropriety. Say that word again." Rowan's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Say anything that even implies Clara is anything but completely respectable, and you and I are going to have a different kind of conversation." "Are you threatening the mayor?" Sheriff Porter's hand went to his gun. "I'm protecting a woman's reputation from being destroyed by people who should know better. If that's a crime in Red Hollow, then your town's got bigger problems than my presence." The standoff held for a long moment. Clara could feel the tension vibrating through Rowan, could sense how close he was to doing something they'd all regret. She put her hand on his arm, a gentle pressure that said, "Stand down, I've got this." To her surprise, he listened. His posture didn't relax, but he took half a step back, yielding the floor to her. Clara addressed the crowd with every ounce of dignity she could muster. "Sheriff Porter, I welcome your investigation. You'll find all my paperwork in order, my kitchen spotlessly clean, and my business practices completely legal. In the meantime, I have contracts to fulfill and customers who depend on me. So unless you're here to arrest me, and we both know you have no grounds for that, I'm going back to work." She turned and walked back into the bakery without waiting for a response. Rowan followed, and together they climbed the stairs to the apartment where Catherine waited, her face drawn with worry. As soon as the door closed, Clara's knees gave out. She sagged against the wall, shaking with delayed reaction. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid," her mother said, pulling her into a fierce hug. "My brilliant, foolish daughter." "They wanted me to grovel," Clara whispered. "Wanted me to apologize for existing outside their approval. I couldn't. I won't. I know. I know, sweetheart. Rowan stood by the window, watching the crowd slowly disperse below. They're not done. This was just the opening move. What do we do? Catherine asked. We accelerate. Build the business so fast they can't stop it without hurting themselves. He turned from the window, his face set with determination. I'm going to Bridger's Crossing tomorrow. Going to find you workers and supplies and every contract I can drum up. We're going to make Clara Hayes' bakery too big to kill. That's going to cost money we don't have, Clara said, her mind already running numbers. I've got savings. Been living alone for 5 years, nothing to spend wages on. It's yours. I can't take your money. It's an investment. I believe in what we're building here, both the business and... He stopped, seeming to catch himself. Just trust me. Please. Clara looked at this man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she'd been too afraid to speak, who'd defended her to a mob, who was offering her everything he had, who looked at her like she mattered more than his own safety. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, we do this together. The next morning, Rowan left before dawn with a list of requirements and a determination that would have been frightening if it wasn't so completely directed toward helping her. Clara threw herself into production, baking with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Every loaf was an act of defiance. Every perfect roll was proof that she belonged here, doing this work, existing in the world without apology. Sheriff Porter came by on Tuesday, just as promised. He went through her kitchen with meticulous attention, checking her supplies, her storage, her documentation. Clara followed him silently, answering questions when asked, but mostly just letting her work speak for itself. After 2 hours, Porter closed his notebook and sighed. You keep a cleaner operation than most restaurants in Cheyenne, he admitted. Your licensing is current. Your business practices are completely legal. He hesitated, then added quietly, For what it's worth, I think the complaints are horseshit, but the mayor's office insisted on the investigation. I appreciate your thoroughness, Sheriff. Miss Hayes, can I give you some advice? Off the record? Clara nodded. This town isn't going to change its mind about you. It doesn't matter how successful you get or how cleanly you run your business. They've decided you're trouble, and people like that don't let go of their grudges. You might want to consider relocating, Cheyenne maybe, or one of the bigger towns where folks are too busy to care about your personal life. You're telling me to run away. I'm telling you to protect yourself. There's a difference. Clara met his eyes steadily. My father built this bakery with his own hands. My mother and I kept it alive when he died. This town doesn't get to take that from us just because they've decided I'm not respectable enough for their taste. I'm not leaving, Sheriff. They'll have to burn me out. The words were prophetic, though she didn't know it yet. Porter left, and Clara returned to her baking. 2 days later, Rowan came back from Bridger's Crossing with 3 young women, sisters, daughters of a homesteading family that had fallen on hard times. Mary, Beth, and Anne Sullivan were 17, 19, and 21 respectively, all practical-minded and desperate for paying work. They're quick learners, Rowan told Clara as the girls looked around the bakery with wide eyes. And they're not afraid of hard work. Their father vouched for them. Clara interviewed them one by one, assessing not just their skills but their ability to withstand what working for her would mean. She was honest about the situation, the town's hostility, the long hours, the uncertain future. You'll be associated with me, she told them plainly. That might make things difficult for you socially. I need you to understand what you're walking into. Mary, the oldest, exchanged glances with her sisters. Miss Hayes, we're homesteaders living in a sod house on marginal land. Social standing isn't exactly our primary concern. If you're offering fair wages and honest work, that's more than most folks will give us. Fair wages and honest work are exactly what I'm offering. When can you start? How about now? Within a week, Clara's operation had transformed. The Sullivan sisters proved to be exactly what she needed, hardworking, efficient, and utterly unimpressed by Red Hollow's social politics. They learned her recipes quickly, matched her standards for quality, and brought an energy to the bakery that had been missing. Production doubled, then tripled. Rowan secured contracts with the railroad camp and the lumber operation. Money started flowing in faster than Clara had dreamed possible. She paid off her debts, restocked her supplies, and for the first time in years, had enough left over to actually save. The town watched this success with increasing bitterness. Every loaf Clara sold to the camps was a loaf not purchased from local suppliers. Every dollar she earned was a dollar that bypassed Red Hollow's established merchants. She was succeeding outside their system, proving that their approval wasn't necessary for survival, and they hated her for it. The harassment escalated. Someone left a dead rat on the bakery's doorstep. Graffiti appeared on the walls, ugly words that Clara scrubbed off before her mother could see them. The Sullivan sisters were accosted on their way home one evening by a group of men who suggested they'd be better off finding respectable employment. Rowan started staying in town more often, sleeping in the bakery's back room to provide security. His presence deterred the worst of the harassment, but it also fed the rumors about Clara's supposed moral failings. "They're going to keep pushing until something breaks," Catherine said one evening, watching her daughter knead dough with mechanical precision. "I'm worried, Clara. I'm worried they'll do something we can't come back from. Then we'll deal with it when it happens. We can't live in fear of what they might do." "That's not living in fear, that's being realistic. You've made powerful enemies, the mayor, the merchants, the church ladies. They all want you gone. People like that don't stop at gossip." Clara shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. "What would you have me do, Mama? Give up? Sell the bakery and move somewhere else where the same thing will probably happen eventually? I'm tired of running from people who hate me for no good reason. If they're going to destroy me, they'll have to work for it." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "You sound like your father. He had that same stubborn pride, that same refusal to bend to bullies. Did you ever wish he'd been more flexible, more willing to compromise?" "Every single day. And I loved him fiercely for being exactly who he was. Consequences be damned." She crossed to Clara and turned her daughter to face her. "I'm proud of you. Terrified, but proud. Just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't let pride push you into taking risks that aren't worth it." "I promise, Mama." It was a promise Clara meant in the moment, but like so many promises, it would prove easier to make than to keep. The fire came 3 weeks later on a moonless night when the wind howled down from the mountains like wolves hunting prey. Clara had worked late, finishing a massive order for the railroad camp's anniversary celebration. She'd finally crawled into bed around midnight, exhausted but satisfied, dreaming of expansion and success and a future that felt almost within reach. She woke to her mother screaming, smoke thick and black choking the air, heat pressing against her skin like a physical force, flames visible through the gaps in the floorboards, already consuming the bakery below with terrifying speed. Clara grabbed her mother's arm and pulled her toward the door, but the stairwell was already engulfed. They were trapped. The windows. They had to get to the windows. The bedroom door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Rowan came through the smoke like something mythical, his shirt wrapped around his face, his eyes streaming from the smoke. "Out the window! Now!" he shouted, already moving to help Catherine toward the opening. Clara's mind cataloged details even through the panic. The window onto the roof of the neighboring building, the 8-foot drop to the alley below. The flames reaching up through the floor, hungry and relentless. Rowan got Catherine to the window and helped her through. The older woman hesitated on the ledge. "Jump! I'll catch you!" someone shouted from below. Clara recognized the Sullivan sisters' voices, bless them, already organizing a rescue. Catherine jumped. Clara heard her mother cry out as she landed, but there was no time to check if she was hurt because Rowan was already turning back for Clara, and the floor was beginning to collapse, and the heat was so intense it hurt to breathe. "Your turn," Rowan said, guiding her to the window. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you. Go!" Clara went, trusting him, throwing herself into the darkness and landing hard in the arms of Mary Sullivan and 2 men she didn't recognize. They caught her, lowered her to the ground, and immediately looked up for Rowan. He appeared in the window a moment later, but something was wrong. The flames had caught his shirt, and he was beating at them, and the roof he was standing on was beginning to sag, and Clara heard herself screaming his name. Rowan jumped just as the roof collapsed. He hit the ground wrong, rolling to extinguish the remaining flames, and came up with blood streaming down his face from a gash on his forehead. Clara ran to him, her hands frantically checking for injuries. "You're hurt. I'm fine. Your mother—" "I'm here," Catherine called weakly. She was sitting against the alley wall, her ankle at an odd angle. Twisted it in the fall, but I'm alive. The bakery burned with the intensity of a bonfire, flames shooting through the roof, consuming years of work and memories and hope in minutes. The entire town had turned out to watch, forming a bucket brigade that was obviously too little too late, their efforts perfunctory at best. Clara stood in the alley in her nightgown, covered in soot, watching her life burn. She should have been crying, should have been on her knees, destroyed by this final, vicious blow, but instead she felt something cold and hard crystallizing in her chest. Certainty. Pure and absolute. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone had decided that if they couldn't drive her out with words, they'd do it with fire. Sheriff Porter appeared out of the smoke, his face grim. "Did anyone see how it started?" "It started," Clara said, her voice perfectly steady, "with someone who wanted to destroy me. That's how it started, Sheriff. The question is what you're going to do about it." Porter looked away, and that told Clara everything she needed to know. There would be no investigation, no justice. The town had decided she was expendable, and they'd act accordingly. Rowan's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers lacing through hers with desperate strength. "We rebuild," he said quietly, fiercely. "We rebuild bigger, better, somewhere they can't touch it." Clara looked at him. This man who'd run into a burning building for her, who'd risked everything, who was still here when any sane person would have fled. And in that moment, watching her bakery burn and feeling Rowan's hand in hers, Clara made a decision. "Marry me," she said. Rowan went very still. "What?" "Marry me. Not someday. Not when things are stable. Now. Right now. I want to choose something for myself, Rowan. I want to choose you, and I want the whole damn town to witness it." "Clara, I know it's crazy. I know this is the worst possible timing, but I'm standing in the ashes of everything I've built, and the only thing that feels real is you. So yes or no, Rowan Vance. Will you marry me?" The firelight caught in his eyes, turning them molten. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, genuine and full and transformative. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yeah, Clara Hayes. I'll marry you." The crowd that had gathered to watch the bakery burn fell silent at Clara's words. In the firelight, with soot streaking her face and her nightgown torn, she stood like something forged in the flames, rather than destroyed by them. Catherine struggled to her feet despite her injured ankle, leaning heavily against the alley wall. "Clara, sweetheart, you're in shock. You don't have to make decisions like this right now." "I'm not in shock, Mama. I'm finally clear-headed." Clara turned to face her mother, still gripping Rowan's hand like a lifeline. "I've spent my whole life waiting for the right moment, the safe moment, the moment when everything lined up perfectly. There is no perfect moment. There's just now, and the choice to be brave enough to take it." "But marriage, Clara, that's not something you do on impulse." "It's not impulse." Clara's voice carried across the alley, and she didn't care who heard. "I've known for weeks now, maybe longer. I just didn't have the courage to admit it until everything else was taken away, and I could see what actually mattered." Sheriff Porter stepped forward, his expression caught between concern and confusion. "Miss Hayes, your mother's right. You've just lost everything. You're not thinking straight. Why don't we get you somewhere safe, get you cleaned up, and what? Wait until morning so you can all convince me this is a bad idea? Tell me all the reasons why I should be sensible and careful and small?" Clara's laugh was sharp and bright. "I'm done being sensible. Sensible got me nowhere. Careful got my bakery burned down. Small got me treated like I was nothing for 26 years. Rowan's grip on her hand tightened, and when Clara looked at him, she saw understanding in his eyes. He knew what she was doing, claiming her life in the most public, irreversible way possible, making a statement that couldn't be taken back or smoothed over or explained away. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly, just for her. "Once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to me, to all the baggage I come with. The town will never forgive it." "I don't want their forgiveness. I want a life that's mine." Clara stepped closer, close enough to see the soot smudged across his cheekbone, the burn on his neck from where a spark had caught him. You almost died tonight pulling me out of that fire. You didn't hesitate, didn't calculate the risk or worry about what people would think. You just came for me. That's worth more than a lifetime of this town's approval." Something shifted in Rowan's expression, the last of his resistance crumbling. He turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying that edge of controlled danger that made people nervous. "Anyone here qualified to perform a marriage?" The question hung in the smoky air. People shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Finally, a man Clara vaguely recognized as the circuit judge who came through Red Hollow twice a year stepped forward. "I can officiate," Judge Hendricks said slowly. "But son, are you sure you want to do this here? Now? There's no ring, no license, no... We can get the license tomorrow and file it retroactively. You've done it before for minors who needed to marry quick." Rowan's tone left no room for argument. "As for rings and ceremony, we don't need them. We need your authority to make it legal. Everything else is just decoration." The judge looked between them, then at the burning building, then back at their joined hands. "Well, I've married folks in stranger circumstances, I suppose, though not many." He pulled a small book from his jacket pocket. Apparently he carried it everywhere, and opened to a marked page. "We'll need witnesses." "I'll witness." Mary Sullivan stepped forward, her sisters flanking her. "All three of us will." "And I will," Catherine said firmly, hobbling forward on her twisted ankle. When Clara started to protest, her mother held up a hand. "If my daughter is determined to get married in an alley at 2 a.m. while her life burns down around her, the least I can do is witness it, though I reserve the right to say I told you this was insane." "Noted, Mama." More people pressed closer, drawn by the spectacle. Clara could hear the whispers, could feel the judgment radiating from the crowd like heat from the fire. Let them judge. Let them talk. This was hers, and they couldn't take it from her. Judge Hendricks cleared his throat and began the abbreviated ceremony, his voice competing with the crackle of flames and the shouts of the bucket brigade still fighting the losing battle against the fire. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of..." He paused, glancing at the burning building, "in highly unusual circumstances to join this man and this woman in matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted." Clara almost laughed at the word reverently, given their current circumstances, but she kept her face composed. "Rowan Vance, do you take Clara Hayes to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Rowan's eyes never left Clara's face. "I do." "Clara Hayes, do you take Rowan Vance to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." Clara's voice rang clear and certain. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Judge Hendricks snapped his book shut. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Vance. Though perhaps we should move away from the burning building first." Rowan didn't wait. He pulled Clara close and kissed her there in the alley with the town watching and her livelihood burning and the future completely uncertain. It was a kiss that tasted like smoke and promise, like defiance and hope, like the beginning of something that couldn't be undone. When they finally broke apart, Clara was dizzy and breathless and more sure of this choice than she'd been of anything in her entire life. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some people were scandalized, already turning away with disgusted expressions. Others seemed almost gleeful at the scandal of it all. This would be talked about for years. Mrs. Ashford's voice rose above the din, shrill with outrage. "This is disgraceful, an absolute mockery of a sacred institution. Sheriff Porter, surely there's something—" "Something what, Margaret?" Sheriff Porter's voice was weary. "They're both adults. The judge is legitimate. It's completely legal, even if it is the strangest wedding I've ever witnessed. But the impropriety is that someone burned down this woman's business in the middle of the night," Catherine interjected sharply. "Perhaps you should direct your outrage there." Mrs. Ashford sputtered, but found no response. The mayor appeared at her elbow, his face flushed from the heat of the fire and possibly from embarrassment. Catherine, surely you can't approve of this hasty decision. What I approve of, Harold, is that my daughter found someone who values her enough to run into a burning building. That's more than most marriages in this town can claim. Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to get off this ankle, and the newly married couple needs to find somewhere to sleep since their home just burned down. The Sullivan sisters immediately stepped forward. You can stay with us, Mary offered. It's not much, but we have room, and it's better than the boarding house where everyone will gawk at you. Thank you, Clara said, gratitude making her voice thick. We'll take you up on that. As they started to move away from the fire, Rowan supporting Catherine on one side while Beth Sullivan took the other, Sheriff Porter called out, Mr. Vance! Mrs. Vance! He paused, seeming to test out the new title. I'll need statements from both of you tomorrow about the fire. About how it started, what you saw, anything unusual. Someone said it deliberately, Clara said flatly. I don't know who, but fires don't start themselves in the middle of the night, in buildings with cold ovens. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Whether you investigate it as such is up to you, Sheriff. But we both know what happened here tonight. Porter's face was unreadable in the firelight. I'll conduct a thorough investigation. You have my word on that. It was probably the best they'd get, and Clara was too exhausted to push harder. She let Rowan guide her away from the burning bakery, away from the crowd, away from the only home she'd known since childhood. The Sullivan homestead was a modest sod house about 3 miles outside town, cramped but clean. The sisters bustled around making space, heating water for washing, finding spare blankets and pillows. Their parents, weathered farmers who'd clearly been roused by their daughter's late-night absence, accepted the entire situation with the philosophical calm of people who'd seen enough frontier chaos to be unshakable. Congratulations on your marriage, Mrs. Sullivan said, pressing a cup of hot tea into Clara's trembling hands. Unusual circumstances, but then the best marriages often start that way. My William proposed to me while we were trapped in a barn during a blizzard. Seemed logical at the time. Mr. Sullivan nodded sagely. Survival situations clarify priorities. You two look at each other like you know what matters. That's a good foundation. Clara felt tears prick her eyes at their simple acceptance, their lack of judgment. Thank you for everything. We'll find somewhere else as soon as... You'll stay as long as you need, Mrs. Sullivan interrupted firmly. Our girls speak highly of you, Miss Clara. Mrs. Vance, rather. Says you treat them fair and pay honest wages. That counts for something in our book. They set up a private corner for Clara and Rowan, hanging a sheet for privacy. Catherine was given the girls' room while the Sullivan sisters bunked together in the loft. It was tight quarters, but after nearly dying in a fire, Clara found she didn't care about comfort. She cared about being alive, about Rowan being alive, about her mother being safe. Once they were alone behind the sheet, the adrenaline that had sustained Clara finally crashed. She sank onto the narrow cot, her whole body beginning to shake. Rowan knelt in front of her, taking her soot-blackened hands in his. Hey, look at me. You're safe. We're safe. I know. I just... The words dissolved into shaking. Everything's gone, Rowan. The bakery, the equipment, all my father's tools, the recipes, everything. Years of work just gone. Not everything. He reached up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. You're here. Your mother's alive. We're alive. Everything else can be rebuilt. With what money? What resources? I had everything invested in that bakery. We don't have, we'll figure it out. His voice was steady, certain. That's what we do, remember? We figure things out together. Clara leaned forward until her forehead rested against his, drawing strength from his solidity. I asked you to marry me in an alley while my life burned down. That's insane. We're insane. Probably. She could hear the smile in his voice. But I've been alone in the mountains for 5 years trying to outrun my past. Insanity seems like an improvement. That surprised a laugh out of her, watery but genuine. Your past? Rowan, we're married now, and I barely know anything about you. About what made you, why you... She pulled back to look at him. Will you tell me? Whatever it is you're running from? The shuddered look that crossed his face was painful to witness. He pulled away, sitting back on his heels, his hands clenching into fists. Not tonight, he said quietly. Tonight's already too heavy. Can it wait? Clara wanted to push, wanted to demand the truth now that she had the right to it. But she could see the pain in every line of his body, could sense that whatever he was carrying, it would take more than one night to unpack. Okay, she said softly. But Rowan, eventually I need to know, all of it. We can't build a life together on silence. I know. He stood, helping her to her feet. Let's get you cleaned up. You've got soot everywhere. They washed as best they could with the basin of warm water Mrs. Sullivan had left them, helping each other reach the spots they couldn't see. It was intimate in a way Clara hadn't expected. Rowan carefully cleaning the soot from her back, Clara tending to the burn on his neck with gentle fingers. They moved around each other with that same unconscious synchronization they'd developed in the bakery, learning each other's bodies the way they'd learned to work together. When they finally lay down on the narrow cot, Clara tucked against Rowan's side with his arm around her. She felt the exhaustion pulling her under. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept replaying the fire, kept seeing the flames, kept hearing her mother's scream. I know who did it, she said into the darkness. Rowan's arm tightened around her. You saw someone? No, but it doesn't matter. The mayor, the church ladies, the merchants who lost business to our contracts, any of them could have done it. All of them wanted it done. That's what matters. Not which specific person lit the match, but that the whole town made it possible. Clara, they won't investigate properly. You know they won't. Sheriff Porter will make some notes, interview some people who will all swear they were home in bed, and eventually he'll conclude it was probably an accident, a tragic accident, and life will go on for everyone except us. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something hard and determined. Then we make sure it doesn't matter. We rebuild somewhere they can't touch. Somewhere we control every aspect, every supply line, every customer relationship. We make ourselves untouchable. How? The mining camps, the railroad, the lumber operation. All those contracts are outside Red Hollow's sphere of influence. We've been playing in their territory. It's time to build our own. He shifted, pulling her closer. There's unclaimed land up north of the Silver Peak mine. Good water source, close to the trade routes, far enough from town that we'd be independent, but close enough to still access supplies when needed. We could build there. Build big. Clara's mind started working despite her exhaustion. We'd need permits, equipment, a crew to construct buildings. That's months of work and thousands of dollars we don't have. We have the contracts. We use those as collateral, get loans from banks in Cheyenne or even Denver, banks that don't care what Red Hollow thinks. The mining companies might even invest directly if we pitch it right. They need reliable food supply, and we've proven we can deliver. It was audacious. It was probably impossible. It was exactly what Clara's father would have done. We'd be starting completely over, she said slowly. New location, new buildings, new everything. No safety net. We'd also be free. Free of this town's judgment. Free to build exactly what we want. Free to succeed or fail on our own merits. He paused. Unless you'd rather stay. Try to rebuild here. Make peace with Red Hollow. No. Clara's response was immediate and fierce. I'm done with Red Hollow. Done trying to earn respect from people who will never give it. If we're going to build something new, let's actually make it new. Something that's completely ours. She felt Rowan smile against her hair. Mrs. Vance, I think we might have just made our first major decision as a married couple. The first of many bad ideas, probably. Probably. But they'll be our bad ideas. Clara finally felt sleep beginning to pull her under, exhaustion winning over anxiety. But just before she drifted off, she heard Rowan speak again, so quietly she almost missed it. I lost my family to violence 5 years ago. A claim dispute that turned into a gunfight. My wife, my daughter, they were caught in the crossfire. I've been punishing myself ever since, hiding in the mountains because I couldn't face being around people anymore. Couldn't face building anything that mattered because I was terrified of losing it again. His voice cracked. That's what I've been running from. That's why I'm damaged. And tonight, when I saw that fire, All I could think was that I was about to lose everything again, that I'd waited too long to tell you I loved you, that I'd wasted the chance I'd been given. Clara's throat closed. She turned in his arms to face him, seeing the tears on his face even in the darkness. Rowan, I love you, Clara. I should have said it weeks ago. Should have said it the first time you smiled at me like I mattered. But I was afraid, and now I'm done being afraid. So I'm saying it now. I love you. And whatever we build together, whatever comes next, I'm all in. No more holding back. Clara kissed him, tasting salt and smoke and promise. I love you too. And I'm terrified. But I'm all in too. They held each other in the darkness of a borrowed room in a sod house miles from the wreckage of their old lives. Outside, Red Hollow slept or whispered or gloated over the fire that had destroyed Clara's bakery. Inside, two damaged people who'd found each other in the chaos began planning their resurrection. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Clara woke to find Rowan already gone, a note left on the pillow saying he'd gone to survey the bakery ruins and talk to the sheriff. She dressed in borrowed clothes from the Sullivan sisters, plain work dress and apron, and found her mother in the kitchen helping Mrs. Sullivan prepare breakfast. Catherine's ankle was swollen, but not broken, wrapped in clean bandages. She looked tired, but determined, the same expression Clara had seen so many times after her father died, when Catherine had decided that grief was a luxury they couldn't afford. How are you feeling? Clara asked, pouring herself coffee from the pot on the stove. Like I fell out of a second-story window, but alive, which is more than we had any right to expect. Catherine studied her daughter with sharp eyes. No regrets about last night's impromptu wedding? None. You're sure because marriage is… Mama, I'm sure. More sure than I've been about anything in years. Clara sat down at the rough wooden table. I know it looked impulsive, but it wasn't. Not really. I've been falling in love with him for weeks. Last night just made me brave enough to admit it. Catherine's expression softened. Your father proposed to me 3 days after we met. I thought he was insane. Turned out he was just certain. Sometimes, and all the waiting in the world won't make you more sure. Exactly. That said, Catherine's voice took on a practical edge. You and your new husband need to have some serious conversations about the future, about where you'll live, how you'll rebuild, what comes next. Love is important, but logistics matter too. We talked about it last night. We're thinking about building north of the Silver Peak mine, starting completely fresh. That's ambitious. It's necessary. Red Hollow will never let us succeed here. Last night proved that. Before Catherine could respond, the door opened and Rowan entered, his face grim. Behind him came Sheriff Porter and, surprisingly, Judge Hendricks. Mrs. Vance, Porter said, the title still sounding strange, we need to talk about the fire. Judge Hendricks has some information that might interest you. Clara stood, her heart hammering. What kind of information? Judge Hendricks pulled out a folded piece of paper. After I left the fire last night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the timing, the deliberateness of it. So I went to the land office and checked some records. Turns out, 3 days ago, Mayor Ashford filed a lien claim on your bakery property, based on alleged unpaid municipal fees and back taxes. That's impossible. My accounts are current. I have receipts. The receipts were in the bakery, Rowan said quietly, which conveniently burned down. The implications hit Clara like a physical blow. He was planning to take the property. The fire wasn't just harassment. It was the first step in forcing me out so he could claim the land. I can't prove it, Sheriff Porter said, but the judge's discovery raises serious questions about motive. I've requested the mayor come to my office this afternoon to explain the lien. I'll also be interviewing neighbors about any suspicious activity they might have seen last night. Will anything actually come of it? Clara asked bitterly. Or is this just for show? Porter's jaw tightened. I take my job seriously, Mrs. Vance. I know you don't think much of me right now, and maybe I deserve that. But attempted murder via arson is different than harassment. If I find evidence linking anyone to that fire, I will prosecute. You have my word. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to think that justice might actually be served, but she'd seen too much of how Red Hollow worked to have much faith. Thank you, Sheriff. Keep me informed. After Porter and the judge left, Clara sank back into her chair, her mind racing. If Ashford was trying to steal the property, then rebuilding there would be walking right into his trap. Which is why we don't rebuild there, Rowan said firmly. We go with the plan. New location, new start. But the land, the location, it's prime commercial real estate. My father bought it when Red Hollow was nothing. It's worth whatever you can get for it, which right now is probably nothing since it's tied up in a fraudulent lien claim. Rowan pulled a chair close to Clara's and sat down. Even if you fought it and won, how long would that take? Months? Years? And the whole time you're fighting legal battles, you're not baking, not earning, not building the life you deserve. He was right, and Clara hated it. Hated that the mayor's greed might actually succeed in driving her out. Hated that staying to fight would cost her more than leaving ever could. So we let him win, she said flatly. We let him have a piece of burned ground in a dying town. Meanwhile, we build an empire where he can't touch it. Who wins there? Catherine reached across the table to grip Clara's hand. Your father always said the best revenge was success. Make yourself so successful they choke on their own bitterness. Clara took a shaky breath, then straightened her shoulders. All right, then that's what we do. We make them choke on it. Over the next week, Clara and Rowan threw themselves into planning with an intensity that bordered on obsession. They rode out to the land north of Silver Peak Mine, surveying the terrain and water sources. It was beautiful up there, a small valley protected from the worst winds, with a creek running through it and stands of timber nearby for construction. The mine was visible in the distance, close enough for easy delivery but far enough for independence. We could build the main bakery here, Clara said, pointing to a flat area near the creek. Storage buildings there, housing for workers over there. Maybe eventually a store, a boarding house for the miners. You're thinking too small, Rowan interrupted. Think bigger. What if we built a whole supply depot? Not just bakery goods, but general provisions, equipment, a place where all the mountain operations could source what they need. We become the hub for everything that happens up here. Claire's mind expanded with the possibilities. We'd need investors, serious money to build something that scale. I met with the mine owner yesterday, presented the idea. He's interested, very interested, offered to go in as a partner. He provides capital and guaranteed contracts. We provide management and operation. Rowan, that's huge. That's bigger than anything I imagined. You deserve bigger than you imagined. He pulled her close, and Clara let herself lean into his strength. You've been thinking like someone who has to beg for scraps. Start thinking like someone who's building an empire. It was dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating. Everything Clara had ever wanted was suddenly within reach, bigger and more ambitious than her original dreams. All she had to do was be brave enough to take it. They filed the claim on the land, registered the business partnership with the territorial government, and began recruiting workers. The Sullivan sisters signed on immediately. Word spread through the mining camps that Clara was building something new, and applications came in. Experienced builders, teamsters, even a few miners looking for above-ground work. Red Hollow watched all of this with growing alarm. The mayor's attempt to claim Clara's burned property had stalled when Judge Hendricks publicly questioned the legitimacy of the lien. Sheriff Porter's investigation was ongoing, and while no arrests had been made, the scrutiny had made the town's leadership nervous. Mrs. Ashford made one last attempt to assert control, appearing at the Sullivan homestead with a delegation of church ladies. Clara, dear, she said with patently false sweetness, we've come to discuss your future. Surely you can see that this hasty marriage, this reckless business venture, it's all terribly unwise. If you would just— Mrs. Ashford, Clara interrupted calmly, I'm not interested in anything you have to say. You and your friends spent years making my life miserable. You turned an entire town against me for the crime of existing outside your narrow definition of acceptable. And when I started succeeding despite you, someone burned my bakery down. So no, I won't be taking advice from you. I won't be apologizing. And I won't be coming back to Red Hollow. You can keep your judgment. I don't need it anymore. The church ladies left in a huff, and Clara felt lighter than she had in years. Construction began 2 weeks after the fire. Rowan's crew worked with impressive speed, raising the main building's frame in just days. Clara divided her time between supervising construction and maintaining her existing contracts. The Sullivan homestead kitchen became a temporary bakery, production smaller but sufficient to keep the mining camps supplied. One evening, as Clara and Rowan stood surveying the progress, he finally told her the whole story. About his wife Sarah and daughter Emma. About the land dispute with a neighboring rancher that had escalated into violence. About arriving home to find his family dead, caught in the crossfire of a gunfight he'd started by refusing to back down. "I couldn't save them," he said, his voice raw with old pain. "Couldn't protect them. And afterward, I couldn't stand to be around people. Every face reminded me of what I'd lost. So I ran. Built that cabin as far from civilization as I could and tried to forget what it felt like to care about anything." Clara held him while he grieved, finally releasing tears he'd held for 5 years. When he was spent, she spoke softly. "You can't control everything, Rowan. You can't protect everyone from every danger. All you can do is show up and try. And you did that. You've been doing it for me since the day you pulled me out of that dust storm. I'm terrified I'll fail you too, then we'll be terrified together. But we won't let fear stop us from living." They stayed there until dark, holding each other beside the skeleton of their future, two people who'd been broken by loss learning to be whole together. 3 weeks after the fire, the main building was complete. It was larger than Clara's old bakery had been, with proper ventilation, modern ovens ordered from Chicago, and storage space for months of supplies. The first day of operation, Clara stood in the pristine kitchen and felt her father's presence like a blessing. "We did it, Papa," she whispered. "Different than you planned, but we did it." That night, she and Rowan christened their new home, a small cabin they'd built adjacent to the main building. It was modest but theirs, filled with furniture they'd chosen together and dreams they were building brick by brick. As Clara fell asleep in her husband's arms, in a bed they owned, in a house they'd built, in a business they controlled, she thought about the girl she'd been just months ago. That girl who made herself small, who apologized for existing, who believed she would never be chosen. That girl was gone, burned away in the fire that was supposed to destroy her. In her place was a woman who'd looked at ruin and seen possibility, who'd turned loss into liberation, who'd chosen love in the ashes and built an empire from the flames. Red Hollow could keep its judgment and its bitterness. Clara Vance had something far more valuable. She had herself, she had Rowan, she had a future that was entirely theirs, and nothing, not fire, not hatred, not fear, could take that away. The empire grew faster than even Rowan's ambitious projections. Within 2 months, what had started as a bakery had evolved into the Mountain Territory's primary supply depot. The main building housed not just Clara's expanded baking operation, but also a general store, a small pharmacy stocked with basic medicines, and a freight coordination office that managed deliveries to 7 different mining camps and 3 lumber operations. Catherine had recovered from her ankle injury and taken over the general store operations with the same fierce efficiency she'd once applied to managing the old bakery's front counter. She hired 2 local women whose husbands worked the mines, creating employment that their families desperately needed. The Sullivan sisters had become Clara's production managers, each one specializing in different aspects of the operation. Mary handled sourdough and artisan breads. Beth managed the sweet goods and pastries, and Anne coordinated packaging and shipping. Rowan had transformed from a solitary mountain man into something resembling a frontier businessman, though he still looked profoundly uncomfortable in the clean shirts Clara insisted he wear when meeting with investors. He'd expanded his logistics operation to include 4 wagons and a rotating crew of drivers, establishing reliable supply routes that connected the mountain operations to larger markets in Cheyenne and beyond. Money flowed in with a steadiness that still amazed Clara. Real money, the kind that allowed her to pay fair wages, invest in equipment, and build savings against future uncertainty. She'd opened accounts at 2 different banks, learning the language of finance and credit with the same determination she'd once applied to perfecting her father's cinnamon roll recipe. But success brought its own complications, and some of them wore badges. Sheriff Porter appeared at the depot on a cold morning in early November, his face carefully neutral. Clara was in the bakery directing the day's production when one of the workers came to fetch her. "Sheriff's here, Mrs. Vance. Says he needs to speak with you and Mr. Vance both." Clara wiped flour from her hands and found Rowan already in the office, standing by the window with that watchful tension he got when he sensed trouble. Porter sat in one of the chairs, his hat in his hands. "Sheriff," Clara said evenly, "what brings you all the way up here?" Wanted to give you an update on the investigation. Thought you deserved to hear it in person. Porter's expression was grave. We found evidence. A witness saw Mayor Ashford meeting with Samuel Tucker. You know him, works odd jobs around town, the night before the fire. There was money exchanged, and Tucker's been spending well beyond his means lately, buying drinks at Murphy's, new boots, even a horse. Clara's heart began to pound. You're saying the mayor paid Tucker to burn down my bakery? I'm saying that's what the evidence suggests. We brought Tucker in for questioning yesterday. He cracked pretty quick once he realized he was looking at serious prison time. Admitted everything. Said Ashford promised him $50 to take care of the haze problem. Tucker set the fire with kerosene, made it look like an accident. Rowan's hands clenched into fists. And Ashford? Did you arrest him? Porter's pause told them everything they needed to know. It's complicated. Tucker's testimony is solid, but Ashford has resources, good lawyers, political connections that go all the way to the territorial governor. His attorney's already arguing that Tucker's a known drunk with a grudge, that his testimony is unreliable, that there's no physical evidence directly connecting the mayor to the crime. So he walks away, Clara said flatly. A man tries to have me killed, destroys my business, and he walks away because he has money and connections. I didn't say that. I said it's complicated. Porter stood, meeting Clara's eyes directly. I filed charges. The territorial prosecutor is reviewing the case. It'll go to trial, and there's a decent chance of conviction. But Clara, Mrs. Vance, I need you to understand what testifying will mean. You'll have to come back to Red Hollow, face the town, face Ashford's lawyers who will try to destroy your credibility. They'll bring up your marriage, the circumstances of it, everything they can twist to make you look like the problem instead of the victim. Clara felt Rowan move closer, his presence solid at her back. When's the trial? Probably not until spring. These things take time, especially with a defendant who can afford to delay and delay and delay. Porter put his hat back on. I wanted you to know that justice is moving forward. Slow, but forward. And I wanted to ask if you're willing to testify when the time comes. Clara didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely yes. That man tried to kill me and my mother. He destroyed everything my father built. If there's even a chance of holding him accountable, I'll take it. Even knowing what it'll cost you, the town won't welcome you back, not even for this. I don't need Red Hollow's welcome. I need them to know they didn't break me. That's worth whatever it costs. After Porter left, Rowan pulled Clara into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. We could let it go, build our life here and forget Red Hollow ever existed. Could you? Really? If someone hurt me and faced no consequences, could you actually forget it? Rowan's silence was answer enough. Clara pulled back to look at him. This isn't about revenge. It's about standing up and saying what happened to me matters. That I matter. If I let Ashford walk away without even trying to hold him accountable, I'm saying he was right all along. That I'm nobody. That I can be destroyed without consequence. You're not nobody. You're everything. Rowan's hand came up to cup her face. But I'm scared. Scared of what going back there will do to you. Scared they'll find some way to hurt you again. Then we'll be scared together, but we won't let fear win. It was becoming their refrain, this acknowledgement of terror and the choice to move forward anyway. Clara was learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to act despite it. The next few months were consumed by expansion and preparation. The depot operation grew to employ 23 people directly and supported dozens more through secondary business. The railroad construction camp had moved on, but 2 new mining operations had opened further north, and both of them signed exclusive supply contracts with Clara's operation. She'd also begun teaching baking classes twice a week, passing on her father's techniques to women from the mining camps who wanted to learn a trade. It was deeply satisfying work, watching these women discover their own capabilities, seeing the pride in their faces when they pulled a perfect loaf from the oven. One of her students was a young widow named Sarah Chen, no relation to the merchant in Red Hollow, whose husband had died in a mine collapse 6 months earlier. Sarah had 3 children to support and no marketable skills beyond basic household cooking. She absorbed Clara's teaching with fierce determination, practicing until her hands cramped, studying the recipes like sacred texts. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked one afternoon, kneading dough with increasingly confident hands. Teaching us for free, I mean. You could charge for lessons. Clara paused in her demonstration of braiding technique. Because someone should have done it for me. When my father died and I had to figure everything out alone, I would have given anything for someone to teach me, to tell me I could do it. Consider this paying forward the help I wish I'd received. Well, it's changing lives. Mine, at least. My oldest girl, Emma, she's been helping me practice at home. She's got a real talent for it. Better than me already. The name Emma made Rowan, who was working nearby on inventory, go very still. Clara caught his eye and saw the old grief there, the memory of the daughter he'd lost. But when Sarah's daughter Emma came by later that afternoon, a bright-eyed 12-year-old with flour in her hair and questions about yeast fermentation, Rowan didn't retreat. Instead, he knelt down to the girl's level and patiently explained the science of bread making, his voice gentle in a way Clara rarely heard. That night, lying in bed with Rowan's arm around her, Clara spoke softly into the darkness. "You were good with Sarah's daughter today." Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "She would have been about that age, my Emma, if she'd lived. Tell me about her, not about how she died, about who she was." And so Rowan talked, his voice rough with memory and loss. He told Clara about a little girl who'd loved horses and hated dresses, who could track a rabbit through the woods at age 6, who'd had her mother's laugh and her father's stubbornness. He talked until the words ran out and the tears came, and Clara held him through it all. "I don't want to forget her," Rowan said finally, "but I also don't want to live in the past anymore. Is that betraying her memory? Moving forward? No, she'd want you to live, Rowan." They both would. Sarah and your Emma, they'd want you to find joy again, to build something new without feeling like you're abandoning what you lost. How do you know? Because that's what love does. Real love wants happiness for the people it touches, even after it's gone. Rowan pulled her closer. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just trying to figure it out, same as you." They fell asleep tangled together, two damaged people slowly healing each other through the simple act of choosing to stay. Winter arrived hard and early that year, snow falling in heavy curtains that isolated the mountain operations for days at a time. Clara's depot became not just a supply source, but a lifeline, the only reliable access to food and necessities when the passes closed. She'd planned for this, stockpiling supplies and establishing emergency protocols, and when a blizzard trapped 70 miners at the Silver Peak camp for nearly a week, it was Clara's operation that kept them fed. The mine owner, a pragmatic businessman named Harrison Wells, visited the depot as soon as the passes cleared. "Mrs. Vance, I want to talk about expanding our partnership. What you've built here, it's more valuable than I initially understood. You're not just supplying goods, you're providing infrastructure that makes mountain operations viable year-round." They negotiated for hours, Wells proposing a significant capital investment in exchange for a larger stake in the operation. Clara listened carefully, asked sharp questions, and ultimately agreed to terms that gave her operation the resources to triple in size while maintaining majority control. "You drive a hard bargain," Wells said, shaking her hand to seal the deal. "Your husband must be a patient man." Clara smiled. "My husband is the one who taught me to think bigger than I imagined. He'd tell you I'm not being hard, just fair." "Fair to whom?" "To everyone involved. You get a profitable partnership with reliable management. We get the capital to expand without losing control of what we've built. Seems equitable to me." Wells laughed. "You know, when I first heard about you, the woman running a bakery out of a mountain depot, I assumed you'd be a novelty. A temporary situation until some man took over the real business. I'm glad to be proven wrong." After he left, Catherine found Clara in the office, staring at the signed contract. "Proud of you, sweetheart," her mother said, settling into the chair across from the desk. "Your father would be too. You've built something he could never have imagined." "I wish he could see it. See that his daughter didn't just preserve his legacy. She expanded it. He knows. Wherever he is, he knows." Catherine paused, then added carefully, "Have you told Rowan yet?" Claire's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. Told him what? Don't play coy with your mother. I've been watching you. The way you've been avoiding coffee, the nausea in the mornings you think no one notices, the exhaustion that hits you mid-afternoon. You're pregnant, Clara. Have been for at least 6 weeks, I'd guess. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. And I'm scared, Mama. Scared of what it means, scared of how Rowan will react given what he's lost. That man loves you more than breathing. He'll be terrified, yes, because he knows what loss feels like. But he'll also be grateful for the chance to be a father again. To do it right this time, without the weight of regret he's been carrying. Catherine reached across the desk to take Clara's hand. Tell him soon. He deserves to know. And you both deserve to be happy about this. Clara told Rowan that night, after dinner, when they were alone in their cabin with the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. I have something to tell you, she started, her heart racing. And I need you to listen all the way through before you react, okay? Rowan's expression immediately became wary. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think it is. But it's big, and it's going to change things. And I need you to know that whatever you're feeling is valid, even if it's complicated. Clara, you're scaring me. Just tell me. She took a breath. I'm pregnant. About 2 months along, we think. The baby should come sometime in late spring. Rowan went completely still. For a long moment, he didn't react at all, and Clara felt panic rising in her chest. Then she saw his hand start to shake, saw the emotion breaking across his face like a wave. We're... He couldn't seem to form complete sentences. A baby? Yes. Rowan, talk to me. What are you thinking? Instead of answering, he dropped to his knees in front of her chair and pressed his forehead against her stomach, his shoulders shaking. Clara ran her fingers through his hair, giving him time to process. When he finally looked up, his face was wet with tears. I'm terrified. I'm so damn terrified because I know what it's like to lose everything. I know how fragile this all is, and the thought of something happening to you, to the baby. I know, I'm scared too. But I'm also, his voice broke, I'm so grateful that I get this chance, that we get this chance. I thought I'd never be a father again, never get to experience this, and now, he couldn't finish, overcome by emotion. Clara pulled him up and into her arms, and they held each other while the reality of it settled around them. They were going to be parents. Were going to bring a child into this wild, uncertain frontier life they'd built from ashes and stubbornness. We're going to do this right, Rowan said finally, his voice fierce with determination. We're going to build something stable and safe. We're going to make sure this child never doubts for 1 second that they're loved and protected and valued. Yes, we are, together. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, discussing nursery arrangements and business adjustments, and all the practical considerations of preparing for a baby in a frontier depot. But underneath the logistics was a current of joy so profound it made Clara's chest ache. She'd thought the bakery fire had taken everything. Instead, it had cleared the ground for something better than she'd ever imagined. The news of Clara's pregnancy spread through the mountain community quickly. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Workers congratulated her, customers brought gifts, even Harrison Wells sent a generous bonus to help with preparations. It was the kind of community support Clara had never experienced in Red Hollow, and it made her realize how much energy she'd wasted trying to earn acceptance from people determined to withhold it. But not everyone was celebrating. Word eventually reached Red Hollow, and with it came a letter from Sheriff Porter. Mrs. Vance, he wrote, I thought you should know that the trial date has been set for March 15th. The prosecutor feels the case is strong, but Ashford's attorneys are mounting an aggressive defense. They've indicated they plan to attack your character extensively, using your marriage, your business success, and now your pregnancy as evidence of moral failing that supposedly justifies the mayor's concern about your influence on the town. It's ugly strategy, but effective with the right jury. I wanted you to be prepared for what's coming. Clara read the letter to Rowan that evening, her voice steady despite her anger. They're going to try to make the trial about me instead of about attempted murder. They're going to paint me as the villain and Ashford as the concerned citizen trying to protect Red Hollow from my corrupting influence. Let them try. Rowan's voice was hard. You've got documentation of everything: your business success, your clean operations, testimonials from dozens of satisfied customers and employees. The facts are on your side. Facts don't always matter when prejudice is involved. You know that as well as I do. Then we make the facts impossible to ignore. We bring witnesses. We bring evidence of what you've built here. We show the jury exactly what kind of person tries to burn down someone's livelihood out of spite and greed. Clara rested her hand on her barely there bump, feeling the weight of what was at stake. I'm going to be 6 months pregnant by March, standing in a courtroom defending my right to exist while carrying our child. Do you know how vulnerable that makes me feel? I know. But you're not going in alone. I'll be right there. Your mother will be there. Every person you've helped, every life you've touched, they'll be there too, even if they can't all fit in the courtroom. You're not the isolated woman Red Hollow tried to destroy anymore. You're surrounded by people who know your worth. He was right, Clara realized. She'd built more than a business in these mountains. She'd built a community of people who'd chosen her, who valued her, who would stand with her when it mattered. The winter passed in a blur of preparation, both for the trial and for the baby. Clara worked as much as her energy allowed, training additional staff to cover her responsibilities when the baby came. Rowan threw himself into expanding their cabin, adding a nursery and reinforcing the structure to withstand the harsh mountain weather. Sarah Chen and her daughter Emma had become fixtures at the depot. Sarah's baking had improved so dramatically that Clara hired her as a full-time production assistant, and young Emma spent her free time learning everything she could about the business side of the operation. Watching Rowan interact with the girl, patient and encouraging, clearly seeing echoes of his lost daughter, but choosing to embrace the connection rather than flee from it, made Clara's heart full. One afternoon in late February, Emma approached Clara with unusual shyness. "Mrs. Vance, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. My ma says you're going to have a baby. And I was thinking, when the baby comes, you'll probably need help, and I'm real good with babies. My ma had twins last year before they—" She stopped, the grief still too fresh. "Anyway, I could help, if you wanted. I could watch the baby sometimes so you could work." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. This child who'd lost so much was offering to help, to be part of something new and hopeful. "Emma, that would be wonderful, thank you." The girl beamed. "I'll be real careful, I promise." After Emma left, Rowan appeared at Clara's elbow. "She's a good kid." "She is, and you're good with her. With all of them, the workers, the customers, the children. You've built more than a business here, Rowan. You've built a life that includes people, connection, community. That's not nothing." "It's everything," he said quietly. 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined this. Couldn't have imagined wanting any of it. Now, I can't imagine going back." "You won't have to. We're moving forward, remember? No matter what the trial brings, no matter what Red Hollow tries to do, we keep moving forward." The subpoena arrived in early March, officially requiring Clara's presence at the trial. She'd known it was coming, but seeing it in writing still made her stomach clench. She had 1 week to prepare, to gather her evidence and her courage, and face the town that had tried to destroy her. The night before they were scheduled to leave for Red Hollow, Clara stood in the nursery Rowan had built, her hand on her growing belly. The room was simple but sturdy, with a cradle Rowan had carved himself and curtains Catherine had sewn. It represented hope, future, the life they were building together. "I'm doing this for you too," she whispered to the baby. "So you grow up knowing your mother didn't back down. So you know that standing up for yourself matters, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Rowan found her there and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands covering hers on her stomach. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's my girl." They left at dawn, Catherine riding with them in the wagon. The journey to Red Hollow took most of the day, and as the familiar buildings came into view, Clara felt her shoulders tense. "Remember," Rowan said quietly, "you're not the same person who left here. You're stronger now. They don't get to define you anymore." Clara nodded, straightening her spine. She'd faced down fires and prejudice and loss. She'd built an empire from ashes and found love in the ruins. Whatever Red Hollow threw at her, she would survive it. She had too much to live for to do anything else. The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Clara had expected hostility, but the sheer number of people who'd turned out surprised her. The benches were filled with Red Hollow residents, their faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. Mrs. Ashford sat in the front row behind her husband, her expression one of martyred suffering. But Clara wasn't alone. Harrison Wells had come down from the mine, bringing a delegation of workers who'd taken the day off to support her. Sarah Chen was there with young Emma. The Sullivan sisters had closed the depot for the day and made the journey. Even old Mr. Chen from the general store sat near the back, catching Clara's eye and giving her an encouraging nod. Sheriff Porter approached as they took their seats. "The prosecutor wants to meet with you before we start. Go over your testimony, make sure you're prepared for what Ashford's lawyers will throw at you." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Thorne, who'd come up from Cheyenne specifically for this case, didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mrs. Vance, I want you to understand what we're up against. Harold Ashford has hired the best defense attorney money can buy, a man who's gotten 3 previous arson cases dismissed by attacking the victim's credibility. He's going to try to paint you as a vengeful woman who made enemies through your own behavior, someone who had more to gain from the fire than Ashford did. How could I gain from losing everything I owned? Insurance money, sympathy, an excuse to relocate and expand your operation? He'll argue that you set the fire yourself or had someone else do it, then blame the mayor when your business rivals turned against you. It's nonsense, but it's the kind of nonsense that can create reasonable doubt." Clara felt Rowan tense beside her. "That's insane. She nearly died. Her mother was injured." "I know. And we have medical records, witness statements, and Tucker's confession to prove it. But Ashford's attorney will argue Tucker is an unreliable witness, that he was paid by Clara's allies to testify falsely, that the whole thing is a conspiracy by people who want to see the mayor brought down." Thorne's expression was grim. "I'm telling you this not to scare you, but to prepare you. When you're on that stand, they're going to attack every aspect of your life. Your marriage, your business, your character. You cannot let them rattle you. You need to stay calm, stick to the facts, and trust that the jury will see the truth. What if they don't? Then we appeal. We keep fighting. But Clara, I believe in this case. I believe in you. Tucker's testimony is damning, and we have circumstantial evidence that supports it. The mayor had motive, means, and opportunity. We just need the jury to see past the smokescreen his lawyers are going to throw up." The trial began with opening statements. The prosecutor laid out a clear narrative. Mayor Ashford, frustrated by Clara's success outside his control and motivated by greed for her valuable property, had hired Samuel Tucker to burn down her bakery. Tucker, desperate for money, had carried out the arson, nearly killing Clara and her mother in the process. Ashford's attorney, a silver-haired man named Cornelius Blake, who looked like he'd stepped out of a painting of a Southern gentleman, told a different story. He painted Clara as a woman of questionable morals who'd scandalously married a known recluse, who'd built a business on undermining Red Hollow's established merchants, who'd made enemies through her own arrogance and now sought revenge by destroying an innocent man's reputation. "The defense will show," Blake intoned, his voice dripping with false concern, "that Mrs. Vance had every reason to want that fire to happen. It freed her from a failing business, gave her an excuse to relocate, provided her with sympathy and support she'd never received on her own merits. And when she needed someone to blame, she pointed at the mayor, a respected civic leader who'd only ever tried to uphold Red Hollow's moral standards." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. Rowan reached over and took one, grounding her. The prosecution called witnesses first. Sheriff Porter testified about the evidence. The kerosene accelerant found at the scene, the timing of the fire, Tucker's spending habits after the incident. The judge who'd married Clara and Rowan testified about the fraudulent lien Ashford had filed on the bakery property. Harrison Wells testified about Clara's business acumen and the success of her mountain operation. Then came Samuel Tucker, looking haggard and defeated in his prisoner's clothes. "Mr. Tucker," Prosecutor Thorne said gently, "please tell the court what happened on the night of October 23rd. Tucker's voice was hoarse. "Mayor Ashford came to me 3 days before, said he had a job needed doing, would pay $50, more money than I'd seen in 5 years. All I had to do was make sure the Hayes Bakery caught fire, make it look accidental." "Did he specify when?" "Said it had to be soon, before the property lien got contested. Said Mrs. Hayes was causing problems for the town and needed to be dealt with. Tucker's hands shook. I didn't think anyone would be home. The place was usually empty by midnight. I poured kerosene around the back, lit it, and left. Didn't find out till morning that people were inside, that I'd nearly... His voice broke. I'm not a murderer. I never meant to kill anyone. But you did set the fire at Mayor Ashford's direction, and for his payment? Yes, ma'am, I did. Blake's cross-examination was brutal. He attacked Tucker's credibility, his drinking habits, his criminal record for petty theft. He suggested Tucker was lying to reduce his own sentence, that he'd been coached by people who wanted to bring down the mayor. Isn't it true, Mr. Tucker, that you have a long-standing grudge against Mayor Ashford for firing you from a municipal job 5 years ago? He didn't fire me. I quit because... Answer the question. Do you have negative feelings toward the mayor? Well, yeah, now I do, seeing as he made me an accomplice to attempted murder. Your Honor, the witness is not being responsive. Judge Hendricks, who was presiding, intervened. Mr. Tucker, please answer the questions asked. Mr. Blake, if you have a specific question about the defendant's alleged involvement, ask it directly. The back and forth continued for hours. By the time Tucker was dismissed, Clara couldn't tell if the jury believed him or not. Their faces were carefully neutral, revealing nothing. Then it was Clara's turn. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking through water. Every eye in the courtroom was on her, including the hostile stares of people who'd made her life miserable for years. But Clara kept her spine straight and her head high. She placed her hand on the Bible, the only time she'd acknowledge it in this proceeding, and swore to tell the truth. Prosecutor Thorne started with easy questions, establishing Clara's background, her father's bakery, her years of running the business. Then they moved to the harder material. Mrs. Vance, can you describe the relationship between your business and Red Hollow's community? Clara chose her words carefully. I served the town faithfully for 8 years after my father died. I provided quality goods at fair prices. But I was never fully accepted socially. There were people who resented my independence, who felt a woman running a business was somehow improper. Did Mayor Ashford ever express concerns about your business? Not directly to me, but I heard through others that he and his wife felt I was setting a bad example, that my success without male oversight was threatening to the town's social order. Blake objected. Hearsay, Your Honor. Sustained. Mrs. Vance, please stick to what you personally experienced. Clara nodded. I personally experienced Mayor Ashford filing a fraudulent lien on my property 3 days before the fire. I personally experienced my business being destroyed. I personally experienced nearly dying in that fire, along with my mother. Those are facts, not hearsay. Thorne walked her through the night of the fire in detail. Waking to smoke, the terror of being trapped, Rowan's rescue. Clara's voice remained steady even as she described the worst moments, even as she saw some jury members visibly affected by her account. And after the fire, what did you do? I married the man who saved my life. I relocated my business to the mountains where I could operate without interference. I rebuilt from nothing and created something better than what I'd lost. Why did you choose to testify today? Clara turned to look directly at the jury. Because attempted murder should have consequences. Because no one should be able to destroy someone's livelihood, nearly kill them, and walk away just because they have power and money. Because if I don't stand up for myself, I'm telling my unborn child that it's acceptable to let bullies win. Then came Blake's cross-examination, and Clara understood what Thorne had been preparing her for. Mrs. Vance, isn't it true that you married Rowan Vance less than an hour after the fire, in what many would consider highly inappropriate circumstances? I married a good man who'd proven his character. The timing was unconventional, but the decision was sound. Unconventional? You were in your night clothes, covered in soot, having just lost everything, and you decided that was the perfect moment to get married? I decided that was the perfect moment to choose something for myself, to claim some agency in a situation where I'd been made completely vulnerable. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity? A rich mountain man who could finance a new business venture? A marriage that would give you an excuse to leave Red Hollow and avoid questions about insurance fraud? Rowan half rose from his seat, but Catherine's hand on his arm stopped him. Clara kept her voice level. I didn't commit insurance fraud. I didn't set that fire. And I married for love, not money, though I understand that concept might be foreign to some people. Blake's eyes narrowed. Your Honor, I ask that the witness's editorial comments be stricken. Mrs. Vance, please answer only the questions asked, Judge Hendricks said mildly, though Clara thought she detected the hint of a smile. Blake pivoted. Let's talk about your business practices. Isn't it true that you deliberately undercut local merchants to steal their customers? I offered competitive prices and quality goods. That's not stealing, that's capitalism. You created conflicts with established businesses. I created competition. If established businesses couldn't handle competition, that's not my fault. You made enemies in Red Hollow. Red Hollow made me an enemy long before I ever challenged their business practices. I was an outsider from the moment my father died and left a woman in charge of his bakery. Blake shifted tactics again. You're currently 6 months pregnant, correct? Clara felt the trap in the question but couldn't see how to avoid it. Yes. And this pregnancy occurred after your marriage to Mr. Vance? Obviously, since we've only been married 6 months. How convenient. A pregnancy that cements your connection to a wealthy man, that provides you with sympathy and support, that makes you appear more respectable. How dare you? Clara's voice cracked like a whip. This child is not a convenience or a strategy. This child is a blessing that my husband and I are grateful for every single day. If you want to attack my character, attack my business practices, attack my choices, fine. But you will not use my unborn baby as a prop in your defense of a man who tried to have me killed. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hendricks gavelled for order while Blake argued that Clara was being unresponsive and emotional. Thorne objected that Blake was badgering the witness. Through it all, Clara sat with her hands on her belly, tears streaming down her face, but her gaze never wavering from the jury. Finally, the judge called a recess. Clara was escorted from the stand, and Rowan immediately pulled her into his arms. You were magnificent, he whispered against her hair. Absolutely magnificent. I lost my temper. You showed them you're human. That's not losing. That's being real. During the recess, several people approached to offer support. Old Mr. Chen from the general store clasped Clara's hand. You spoke truth up there. Some folks needed to hear it. Even Judge Hendricks, in a rare break from judicial neutrality, murmured as he passed. Well said, Mrs. Vance. The afternoon session brought the defense's case. Blake called character witnesses who testified about Ashford's civic contributions, his dedication to Red Hollow, his upstanding reputation. He called business owners who claimed Clara had harmed their livelihoods through unfair competition. He tried to paint a picture of a town leader forced to take action against a disruptive element. But he couldn't call Ashford himself. The mayor's lawyers had advised against it. Putting him on the stand would expose him to cross-examination about the lien, about his meetings with Tucker, about the timeline of events that looked increasingly damning. Thorne's closing argument was passionate and clear. She walked the jury through the evidence step by step, showing how every piece fit together to prove Ashford's guilt. She reminded them of Tucker's testimony, of the physical evidence, of the mayor's motive and opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about power and what happens when powerful men believe they're above the law. Harold Ashford didn't like that Clara Hayes succeeded without his approval. He didn't like that she built something he couldn't control. So he tried to destroy her, literally. He hired someone to burn down her business, and he didn't care if she died in the process. That's not civic leadership. That's attempted murder. And it deserves to be punished. Blake's closing was equally impassioned, arguing reasonable doubt, attacking Tucker's credibility, suggesting elaborate conspiracy theories. But Clara could see him losing the jury, could see skepticism replacing uncertainty on their faces. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Clara spent them pacing the courthouse hallway, unable to eat or rest, her mind churning with possibilities. Rowan stayed close, a steady presence that kept her anchored. When the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict, Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought she might be sick. They filed back into the courtroom and took their seats. Judge Hendricks asked the foreman to stand. On the charge of arson in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. On the charge of attempted murder, how do you find? Guilty. The courtroom exploded. Mrs. Ashford screamed. The mayor sat frozen, his face gray. Clara felt her knees give out, and only Rowan's arm around her waist kept her upright. "Order," Judge Hendricks gavelled repeatedly. "Order in this court." When silence finally fell, the judge addressed Ashford directly. "Mr. Ashford, you have been found guilty of serious crimes, crimes motivated by greed and a belief that your position placed you above consequences. Sentencing will take place in 2 weeks, but I can tell you now that you will face significant prison time. You are remanded to custody immediately." As the sheriff led Ashford away in chains, the man's eyes found Clara's. There was rage there, and disbelief, and the dawning realization that he'd finally met someone he couldn't intimidate or destroy. Clara met his gaze steadily and felt nothing but relief. It was over. Justice had been served. She could finally, truly move forward. Outside the courthouse, the supporters who'd come with Clara erupted in celebration. Harrison Wells lifted her off her feet in an exuberant hug. The Sullivan sisters were crying and laughing simultaneously. Even Sheriff Porter looked satisfied, vindicated in his investigation. But it was Catherine's embrace that finally broke Clara's composure. She clung to her mother and sobbed, from relief, from exhaustion, from the release of 6 months of tension and fear. "You did it, sweetheart," Catherine murmured. "You stood up and you won. We won, Mama. All of us." They stayed in Red Hollow one more night, at the boarding house where the owner, a woman who'd always been quietly kind, gave them her best rooms at half price. That evening, as Clara and Rowan lay in bed, she felt the baby kick for the first time, a flutter of movement that made her gasp. "Did you feel that?" She grabbed Rowan's hand and placed it on her belly. They waited breathlessly, and then it came again, a tiny, unmistakable kick against Rowan's palm. His face transformed, wonder replacing the tension he'd carried all day. "Hello in there," he whispered to her stomach. "We can't wait to meet you." Clara felt tears slip down her temples. "We're really doing this, building a life, raising a child, creating something that lasts. We already have. What we've built. It's not just the business or the depot. It's this. Us, the family we're creating, the community we've gathered. That's what survives, Clara. That's what matters." They left Red Hollow before dawn, neither of them interested in prolonging their stay. As the wagon rolled north toward the mountains, toward home, Clara looked back at the town one last time. She felt no bitterness, no lingering anger, just a quiet satisfaction that she'd stood up for herself and won. "Think you'll ever come back?" Rowan asked. "Maybe. Someday. When it doesn't matter anymore whether I do or not." Clara turned her gaze forward toward the mountains where their future waited. "But for now, I'm exactly where I want to be." The next few months were a blur of preparation and growth. Clara's pregnancy progressed smoothly despite her refusal to slow down much. She trained additional staff to cover her responsibilities during her lying-in period, organized systems to ensure the depot could function without her direct oversight, and generally tried to plan for every possible contingency. "You can't control everything," Rowan told her one evening, watching her reorganize the supply schedules for the 3rd time. "Sometimes you just have to trust that things will work out," says the man who's built 3 different cradles because none of them were perfect enough. He had the grace to look sheepish. Point taken. In late May, when the mountain wildflowers were in full bloom and the snow had finally melted from the high passes, Clara went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth, 18 hours of pain and fear, and Rowan holding her hand through all of it, pale but steady. When their daughter finally arrived, tiny and red-faced and screaming with impressive lung capacity, Clara felt something shift in her soul. This was what she'd been fighting for. This was why standing up mattered, why refusing to be broken was worth the cost. "She's perfect," Rowan breathed, tears streaming down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Clara asked, exhausted but elated. Rowan looked at the baby, then at Clara, and she saw the ghosts of his past being laid gently to rest. "What about hope? Because that's what she represents. Hope that we can build something better. Hope that love can survive loss. Hope that the future is worth fighting for." "Hope Vance." Clara tested the name and found it fit perfectly. "Welcome to the world, Hope. We're so glad you're here." They brought Hope home to a depot that had been decorated by the entire community. Sarah Chen and her daughter Emma had organized a surprise celebration, streamers, and a hand-painted banner welcoming the baby, casseroles and pies filling the kitchen, gifts piled in the nursery. "You've given so much to all of us," Sarah said, tears in her eyes, "teaching us, employing us, believing in us when no one else would. This is just a small way to say thank you." Young Emma shyly approached the bundle in Clara's arms. "Can I hold her? I promise I'll be careful." Clara settled the baby into Emma's arms, watching Rowan's face as he observed the girl with his daughter. She saw peace there, and acceptance, and the understanding that loving this child didn't diminish his love for the daughter he'd lost. It honored her memory by choosing to keep living, keep loving, keep building. The summer brought continued expansion. The depot operation had become so successful that 2 competitors opened similar facilities at other mining territories, which Clara considered a compliment rather than a threat. There was enough business for everyone, and competition kept operations efficient. She'd also begun writing down her father's recipes, creating a comprehensive book of techniques and formulas. It was slow work, done in the quiet moments while Hope napped, but it felt important. These recipes had sustained her through the worst times, had been the foundation of everything she'd built. They deserved to be preserved, passed down, shared. One afternoon in late August, a rider arrived from Red Hollow with a letter. Clara recognized Sheriff Porter's handwriting and opened it with curiosity. "Mrs. Vance," the letter read, "I thought you'd want to know that Mayor Ashford was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. The town has elected a new mayor, a decent man who's promised to root out the corruption that allowed Ashford's behavior. Things are changing here, slowly but surely. The burned bakery lot was sold at auction. The new owner plans to build a hardware store. I hope you find some closure in knowing that Red Hollow is finally moving past its darkest impulses. You were the catalyst for that change, even if you're not here to see it. Thank you for your courage." Clara read the letter to Rowan that evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. 15 years, she said. He'll be an old man when he gets out. Does it feel like justice? Clara considered. It feels like consequences, which is close enough. She folded the letter and set it aside. You know what's strange? I don't hate him anymore. I did, for a long time, but now I just feel indifferent. What he did doesn't define me anymore. I've moved past it. That's called healing. Is it? It feels more like growing, like becoming someone bigger than the pain that tried to break me. Rowan pulled her close, careful of the sleeping baby in her arms. You've always been bigger than that pain. You just needed time to realize it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their world settle into evening. In the depot below, the ovens were banking for the night. In the surrounding cabins, families were gathering for supper. Somewhere in the distance, a harmonica played a lonesome tune that somehow sounded hopeful. This was the life Clara had built from ashes and stubbornness and love. It wasn't the life she'd imagined back in Red Hollow, dreaming small dreams and hoping for scraps of acceptance. It was bigger, stranger, more challenging, and infinitely more fulfilling. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning when Hope was just beginning to sit up on her own and babble in a language only she understood, Clara stood in the depot office reviewing expansion plans with Harrison Wells and 2 other investors. They were discussing opening a second location further north, establishing a supply network that would cover the entire mountain territory. This is ambitious, one of the investors said, studying the proposed budget. You're talking about tripling your operation in 2 years. I'm talking about meeting demand, Clara corrected. The territory is growing, more mines, more lumber operations, more families settling in the mountains. They all need reliable access to supplies. We can either grow to meet that need or watch someone else do it. What about management? You can't be in 2 places at once, especially with a young child. That's why I'm promoting Sarah Chen to operations manager at this location. She knows the business inside and out. She's earned the trust of our workers and customers, and she's ready for more responsibility. I'll oversee both locations, but focus my energy on establishing the new site. The men exchanged glances. You're delegating significant authority to a woman with no formal business training. Clara smiled. I'm delegating to someone who's proven herself capable, just like someone once did for me. It's called building a sustainable organization instead of a personality cult. Wells laughed. Gentlemen, if you haven't learned by now that arguing with Clara Vance is pointless, you're slow learners. I'm in. The expansion makes financial sense, and she's got the track record to pull it off. The meeting ended with handshakes and signatures. As the investors left, Sarah appeared in the doorway with Hope on her hip. Your daughter was getting fussy. Thought you might want her. Clara took the baby gratefully, breathing in that sweet infant smell that always centered her. Sarah, do you have a minute? Of course. I need to ask you something important. The investors have approved the expansion, which means I need someone I trust completely to run this location. Someone who knows the operation, understands the values we've built, and can make good decisions without constant oversight. I want that person to be you. Sarah's eyes went wide. Me? But Clara, you're just the most capable person I know. You've gone from barely knowing how to bake bread to managing our entire production operation in less than a year. You're organized, fair with the workers, innovative in solving problems. And more importantly, you care about this place the way I do. So yes, you, if you want it. I want it. Sarah's voice was fierce. More than anything. But Clara, are you sure? Giving someone like me that much responsibility? Someone like you? You mean someone hardworking, intelligent, and committed to excellence? Yeah, I'm sure. Clara shifted Hope to her other hip. I was someone like you once, an outsider that people underestimated. The difference is that you have someone believing in you right from the start. Don't waste that opportunity questioning whether you deserve it. Just prove them right. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Thank you. I won't let you down. I know you won't. That evening, Clara told Rowan about the expansion and Sarah's promotion. They were in the nursery, Clara rocking Hope, while Rowan sat on the floor sorting through wooden toys he'd carved. You're building something that will outlast you, he said thoughtfully. Something that will keep growing long after we're gone. Your father would be proud. We're building it. You're as much a part of this as I am. I just haul supplies and negotiate contracts. You're the vision behind it all. Clara shook her head. You're the foundation, the stability that makes the vision possible. I couldn't have done any of this alone, Rowan. Wouldn't have wanted to. He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw the same love and partnership that had sustained them through fire and trial and every challenge between. We make a good team. The best team. Hope chose that moment to grab Clara's hair and yank with surprising strength, making them both laugh. Parenthood, Clara was discovering, was equal parts exhausting and exhilarating. Long nights and endless worry balanced by moments of pure joy when Hope smiled or reached for them or did something new and miraculous. Do you ever think about having more? Rowan asked carefully. More children, I mean. Sometimes, do you? Yeah. I think about Hope having siblings, about filling this place with noise and chaos and love. But only if you want it to. I know pregnancy was hard on you. Clara considered. Ask me again in a year. When Hope's sleeping through the night and I've forgotten the worst parts of labor. He grinned. Fair enough. The expansion proceeded smoothly over the next 18 months. The Northern Depot opened to immediate success, serving mining operations that had previously struggled with supply access. Sarah proved to be everything Clara had believed she could be, a capable manager who inspired loyalty and delivered results. Clara's recipe book was published by a territorial press, sold in general stores across Wyoming and beyond. It wasn't a bestseller, but it brought in steady income and, more importantly, spread her father's legacy far beyond what he could have imagined. Young Emma, now nearly 15, had become indispensable to the operation. She'd revealed a head for numbers that Clara immediately put to use in accounting and inventory management. The girl was already talking about going to a business school back east someday, coming back to help expand the operation even further. You've changed her life, Sarah told Clara one afternoon. Given her opportunities she never would have had otherwise. She was going to end up working as a housemaid or maybe getting married to some miner at 16. Now she's talking about college, about building a career. That's because of you. That's because of her own talent and hard work. I just gave her a chance to use it, which is more than most people do for girls like us. Red Hollow faded into memory, a chapter closed and mostly forgotten. Occasionally Clara heard news from there, The new mayor was making reforms. Several of the merchants who'd shunned her had gone out of business. Mrs. Ashford had moved to Denver to live with her sister. None of it mattered much anymore. That life felt like it had belonged to someone else. On Hope's second birthday, Clara and Rowan threw a celebration that drew people from all over the mountain territory. The depot yard was filled with families, children playing games while adults shared food and stories. It was the kind of community gathering Clara had always dreamed of being part of, but had never found in Red Hollow. As the sun set and the party wound down, Clara stood with Rowan watching Hope toddle around with Emma, following protectively behind. "We did it," Clara said softly. "Built a life worth living. Created a place where people belong. We're still doing it. It's not finished yet." "No, but it's good. Really good." Rowan turned to face her, taking both her hands. "I need to tell you something. Been meaning to for a while, but couldn't find the right words. You're worrying me." "Don't be worried. It's good." He took a breath. "Before I met you, I was just surviving, marking time until I died, basically. No purpose, no hope, no reason to care about tomorrow. You changed that. You gave me a reason to live instead of just exist. And every day since, I've been grateful. Not just for the business we built or the family we have, but for you choosing me. For seeing past the broken parts to something worth saving." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You saved yourself, Rowan. I just gave you a reason to try. Then we saved each other, and that's worth celebrating." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple gold with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious but clearly chosen with care. "We got married in an alley with no ring, no planning, nothing but desperation and hope. I want to do it right this time. Clara Vance, will you marry me again, properly, with our family around us, with the life we've built as our witness?" Clara laughed through her tears. "We're already married, you ridiculous man." "I know, but I want to choose you again, publicly, with intention instead of impulse. What do you say?" "Yes. Always yes." They held the ceremony a month later on a perfect September afternoon with the mountains glowing gold in the autumn light. Judge Hendricks came up from Red Hollow to officiate again, clearly delighted to participate in a much more conventional ceremony this time. Hope served as an extremely distracted flower girl, more interested in eating the petals than scattering them. Emma stood up as Clara's attendant. Rowan's hand shook as he slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, and her own hands trembled as she spoke her vows. "I choose you," she said, looking into his eyes. "I chose you in the fire and the chaos, and I choose you now in the peace and the plenty. I choose you today and every day after, for as long as we both live. You're my partner, my love, my home. Everything good in my life is better because you're in it." When they kissed, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. It was joyful and messy and perfect, exactly what their life together had always been. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could reasonably eat. Clara moved through it all in a happy daze, accepting congratulations and well wishes, watching Rowan dance with Hope, feeling the weight of the ring on her finger and the lightness in her heart. Late that night, when Hope was asleep and the last guests had departed, Clara and Rowan stood on their porch, looking out at the empire they'd built. "Think this is what your father imagined when he started that little bakery?" Rowan asked. "No, it's bigger, stranger, better than anything he could have imagined." Clara leaned into her husband's embrace. "But I think he'd approve. I think he'd be proud that I took his dream and expanded it, that I didn't let anyone make me small. He'd be proud that you survived, that you turned pain into purpose." Clara thought about the girl she'd been, quiet, overlooked, apologizing for her existence. That girl would never have believed this life was possible, would never have had the courage to fight for it. But that girl had learned that she was worth fighting for, had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, had chosen love over fear and built an empire from the ashes of destruction. 3 years later, the Vance Supply Company operated 5 locations across the Wyoming Territory, employed over 100 people, and had become one of the largest independent suppliers in the region. Clara had given birth to a son, Robert, who shared his sister's stubbornness and his father's quiet intensity. Emma Sullivan had indeed gone east to business school, writing letters full of enthusiasm about accounting principles and business law. She planned to return after graduation to help manage the company's expansion into Colorado. Sarah Chen had become a partner in the business, her stake bought with sweat equity and proven results. Catherine, now in her 60s but still sharp as ever, had taken over training new bakers, passing on the recipes and techniques that had sustained the family through generations. And Clara and Rowan, now in their early 30s, looked at what they'd built and saw not an ending, but a beginning. The company would grow, their children would add their own chapters to the story, and the legacy that had started in a tiny bakery in Red Hollow would continue far beyond anything its founder could have dreamed. One evening, Clara sat at her desk writing in a journal she'd started keeping for Hope and Robert, a record of how they'd built this life, the choices they'd made, the prices they'd paid. "My darling children," she wrote, "by the time you read this, you'll know the story of the fire. You'll know about Red Hollow and the trial and all the hard things that came before you were born. But I want you to understand what those experiences taught me, because they're lessons worth passing down. I learned that approval from people who don't value you is worthless, that building something meaningful is more important than being liked, that love, real love, chooses to stay when staying is hard, that courage isn't fearlessness, it's doing what scares you anyway, that you can lose everything and still rebuild something better from the ashes. Your father and I built this company, this community, this life, because we refused to let other people's limitations define us. We chose each other when no one else thought we should. We built an empire when everyone said we'd fail. We created a family when we'd both lost so much we were afraid to hope for more. You're the proof that choosing courage over fear is worth it, that love survives loss, that the future belongs to people brave enough to claim it. Never make yourself small to make others comfortable. Never apologize for being more than people expected. Never let fear of failure keep you from trying. And always, always remember, you are worth fighting for. Your dreams are worth pursuing. Your voice is worth hearing. The world will try to break you. Don't let it. Build something beautiful from the pieces instead. With all my love, your mother. Clara set down her pen and looked out the window at the mountains, at the lights of the depot glowing in the darkness, at the life she and Rowan had carved from wilderness and will. She thought about the frightened girl who'd hidden in a bakery, making herself invisible to avoid the town's cruelty, about the woman who'd stood in the ashes of that bakery and chosen defiance over despair, about the empire builder she'd become, creating opportunities not just for herself but for everyone who'd been told they were too much or not enough. The journey from there to here had been fire and pain and loss and rebuilding. It had cost her innocence and illusions and the false comfort of believing that being small would keep her safe. But it had given her everything that mattered: love, purpose, a family built on choice rather than obligation, a business that fed people's bodies and nourished their spirits, a community of outsiders who'd found belonging together. The girl Red Hollow had tried to break was gone, burned away in the fire that was supposed to destroy her. In her place stood Clara Vance, wife, mother, baker, entrepreneur, and living proof that the people who try to break you don't get to write your ending. You do. And hers was only beginning.